Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Elmhurst City Hall. Today is Monday, July 18, 2011. If you could all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And before I ask the official start the meeting with a quorum vote, I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Jim Grabowski, who is taking the role as city manager. Jim? Welcome to Elmhurst. And at this time, to make this meeting official, Clerk Spencer, if you could please call the roll.
Pesach. Here. Gutenkopf. Here. Leader.
Here.
Dunn. Absent. Graham.
Here.
Polumsky. Here. York.
Here.
Tipskin.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Levin.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
13 present, 1 absent.
13 present, 1 absent. We have an official quorum. The first item on our agenda tonight is a YSAT presentation by District 205. And I would ask for that person that would be making the presentation, if you could maybe please rise and you can grab the podium to my right over here and acknowledge who you are, and we can go ahead and start the presentation. And while they're doing that, just so everybody has an idea, YSAT is a new nonprofit group that has been set up to help defer costs of fees and different things for District 205. And with the state cutbacks and whatnot that are going on, there's going to be more and more of a need for everybody in our community to help step up a little bit. And actually, looks like we have some students that are helping out today too, so that's great. So,
Microphone.
if you could please introduce yourself and explain who you are, and let you go ahead and take the presentation.
Thank you. Hello, we are representatives from the York Student Enrichment Team. My name is Abby Arnold. I'm a senior involved in the bands, choir, orchestra, and several academic clubs at York High School.
Hi, I'm Jacob Ruprecht. I'm a senior, and I'm involved in the football team and volleyball team at York, and I'm a member of JKB.
Hi, my name is Kira Tebby. I'm also going to be a senior, and I'm an active member in 9 clubs at York.
The York Student Enrichment Team is a group set up to provide aid to those who are economically challenged and cannot afford the new fees for sports, academics, and extracurriculars this coming school year. We are only 3 representatives of this group, which has grown to include 100 students, parents, and teachers in the past couple months. Our goal is to raise awareness of this issue and ultimately raise enough money so that students can participate and have the best possible York experience.
And I'd just like to talk quickly about kind of the reason that we're here, the need and the economic need for this program. And most people think of Elmhurst as a really affluent town. I mean, we have, a really nice city center and just a really nice, area around us. But it's also very expensive to live and raise a family in Elmhurst. For example, this graph shows the income levels for a District 205 median family of 4. And then the horizontal lines represent the living wage, the line to qualify for reduced lunch, the line to qualify for free lunch, and the poverty level. And it shows that a single father household or a single mother household, the median is already below the living wage, and a single mother family is already at the level of reduced lunch. And there's also a real difference between what's considered like reduced lunch, free lunch, and poverty level, and the living wage. So a family may not qualify for assistance under the reduced or free lunch programs, but they still may be well below the living wage and not be able to cover the cost it takes to live in Elmhurst. And then additionally, it says that 13% of York students receive these free reduced price lunches, but that doesn't reflect the real need. And it's estimated that 60% of people that could apply for these programs don't. And then additionally, this graph shows that while there is a very large percent of the population in Elmhurst that's well above the living wage, a quarter of the city lives below a yearly income of $50,000 a year, which is below the minimum wage, or not the minimum wage, the living wage. And additionally, you may not see a lot of people that seem to be in economic need because kids feel the greatest discrimination based on their economic status. So a lot of times people go to great measures to hide this, and that's one of the reasons why 60% of the students who may qualify for the free reduced lunch programs actually don't apply for it. They may feel shame at being in the program, or there could be other things like they don't know the program exists, there could be language barriers. And then additionally, in the current economic times, this problem could get even worse. I'm sure everybody here knows about job losses, unemployment, foreclosures, and just kind of the state the economy's in right now. And then I also like to talk about just kind of how they're raising the fees in 2011. So not only are they raising the fees for all these organizations like art, band, orchestra, choir, and sports, but also there's increased book fees that will affect every student at York. And it used to be that students who are on free reduced lunch programs would get activity fee waivers in addition to their core academic fee waivers. But now, starting last year and continuing through this year, economically disadvantaged students will not get activity fee waivers. And this is going to hit the economically at-risk students will be hit the hardest by these reduced fees, because studies have shown that when you put a kid in a sport or a club or an organization, they're less likely to perform certain risk behaviors. So you're really putting the at-risk kids at even more risks. And then additionally, a lot of the fees that aren't shown, like for sports, you may need outside training. For band and orchestra, you may need to buy an instrument and take lessons. You may need to buy a calculator or even driver's ed programs. And additionally, there's the $75 activity bus fee, and there's no waiving of that activity bus fee. So say a student needs to stay after for help in the math lab at York, and then they need to pay $75 to get home. So a student may not be able to stay at York for the help they need to pass their class. And then this chart just shows kind of how the fees are going to work at York from this past school year that just ended and the 2011-2012 proposed fees. And all the increased fees are highlighted in red, which just kind of shows a lot of them are changing, and some almost doubled, such as boys basketball is almost twice what it was before. And additionally, this doesn't show the fees for boys and girls lacrosse, which are new school sports. And last year, boys lacrosse was $495, and girls lacrosse was $303. And those don't include all the costs for the equipment, so like sticks, padding, goggles. So the cost can really add up easily.
So as you could see from the previous slide, there are many fee increases. Yes. Last year, when the academic fee waiver was eliminated, it was calculated that an average of 3 athletes per sport were unable to continue doing that sport. And it may not seem like a lot, but for some of those students, it could be the way that they identify themselves. They could have met all their friends through that sport, seen them every day after school, and if they were unable to do this sport because of economic troubles, that's not only embarrassing to them, but then it's also socially difficult because they can't see their friends. Also, because of all the fee increases, some students and families are making the decision of only being able to do one sport for multi-sport athletes, and that's a decision that we don't want our peers to make because it's a very hard one. Also, because a lot of the classes, not the core classes, but other important classes such as band and orchestra and art are having new fees, a lot of parents have been calling social workers asking for their kids to be switched out of these classes because they can't afford the fees. And we want every student to be able to take a class that they want to take regardless of the fees or their economic situation. Our goal is to have every student be able to, fully get all they can out of York, regardless of their economic status. It's on the district website. There's a fact that 94% of all students are involved in some form of way at York, whether this be through a club or through a sport or through choir or band or orchestra. And we want to keep that number high. We want to keep the bond between the students and the community strong. There's been a study that the most crime occurs between 3 and 6, and this is, right when school gets out, kids aren't in an activity, they have nothing to do, so they go and do crime. But if they were in some sort of activity that would promote a kind of teamship or union that they might not have at home, especially for the at-risk kids. And this could help build character and that they may not have at home, I guess. So how can you help? We realize that you as a city council are unaware to give us donations, but we are asking you as individuals and also the people present and also those watching at home to give us donation. These are tax deductible through the District 205 Foundation, but will go directly to us so that we can help our peers do what they want to do at York. In addition to monetary donations, we would also appreciate any awareness you can spread. We realize that many of you in the room are prominent figures in other organizations in Elmhurst. We would appreciate any help you can give us through awareness. Also, if we come back with concrete details on fundraisers that we will hold, we would highly appreciate any help you could give us through that. But it's important to have money to help give these kids, but it's also even more important to let these kids know and these families know that this program is available to them. So if any of you in the room know people or know people who may qualify for this, if you could give them the email address that is on there. It's a confidential email. They can send it in saying what their child is in and that they can't afford the fees, and we will do our best to help them be able to continue what they are doing. In addition, if you donate, we are setting up a program like some sort of plaque like that is currently at the football stadium, but it will have your name or your business name, which is great advertisement. Yeah, so any help you can give us, we would truly appreciate, and we thank you for allowing us to present tonight. Are there any questions?
Any questions from anybody? Alderman Kennedy,
A
Mr.
quick
Chairman.
one. What do you think is the annual amount of money you would need to raise to reach your goal?
Well, for this year, we project that we'll need, people have been crunching numbers, and they project that it's $250,000 for this year. But our goal isn't that this is like a yearly thing. Our goal is this is a one-year effort, and that we can get some kind of change so we won't have to do this every year. And just to show that, we can't accept these fees. We have to help the students now, but also make sure that we aren't doing this every year.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. I'll start off. I'll make a $500 donation, and hopefully somebody will match that, and we'll get you more and more money. So, all right, it'll come out of my personal account. No problem. My pleasure. As I mentioned, when I got back from Springfield, and municipalities did okay. We were fighting for our dollars. Schools really took the hit. Schools and human services just really are taking a tough beating. So we appreciate students like yourself, and I know your family's names. Many of your parents have been public servants and done. Some have served public office, and Alderman Tebby's in the back there, and some have run referendums like the RUPEX before. So we appreciate good people that have our community in their heart. So thank you very much. Next up is receipt of any written communications and or petitions from the public. At this time, if there is anyone with written communications and or petitions, please rise and present those to Clerk Spencer, who's up here to my right. Anybody else with any written communications and or petitions? Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. And I will now go to item 4, which is our public forum. And Clerk Spencer, is there anyone today signed up for public forum at this time?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have quite a few, I believe, 11. So I'll start with Tom Cruise, 868 Sailor.
I just have 2 quick questions, because I'm sure Dr. Burke is going to answer a lot of these. What are the priority areas in our town in terms of flooding? How can we eliminate flooding streets in the south of Elmhurst? And what things can we do right away to lessen the flooding issues? Thank you.
Next, Ellen Cruz, 868 Sailor.
Hi, good evening. I do apologize if Dr. Burke's report is going to answer this question, but we wanted to know, 1 year ago he made an extensive report on the Sailor Jackson pumping station, and in that report he indicated that there is indeed a button that has to be manually pressed by one of our city workers to override the regular pumping system. In the Harza report of 97, it indicated that if this was not done in an emergency situation, that the neighbors' basements in the whole area will back up with sewage. And so, since it's been 1 year, we'd like to know if this override system has been automated, and if it has not been automated and still the city worker has to come to the station and press the button, why has it not been automated? And where is the written policy that we could read that tells the city what the plan is if the severe weather does come again and that button has to be pressed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis Brower, 883 South Prospect.
I have 3 questions. First one, is ComEd on schedule for the upgrades they were planning on doing in town for the electrical grid update that was proposed and I've seen online? Second one, the members of the task force, I'd like to know if they have all signed letters that are conflict of interest, that they, because of the inside knowledge that they will gain out of this, they don't gain personal or friends to help them out with any future work that may come out of this whole study. Number 3, I know that the consultant is working on a model and a large study for us. I would like to know that somebody in Elmhurst, either the task force or somebody in the city council or other managers, have the knowledge to either validate the model or to certify that the information that has been presented is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Marilyn Aredo, 912 Sailor.
A week ago, on July 10th, the Elmhurst Garden Club sponsored a garden walk here in town. 7 beautiful gardens were on display, and almost 700 people wandered through these beautiful backyards. In addition, there was a lunch in Wilder Mansion, a boutique fair in Wilder Park. It was a day in which I was a very proud resident of this town, Elmhurst. Many factors came into play to make the garden walk successful. The homeowners worked tirelessly to showcase their gardens. The Elmhurst Park District supported our club completely. The police department knew of our event, and they were there if we needed their service. Elmhurst College let vendors use their parking lot. Food service of the courts provided lunch in the mansion, and the National Honor students from York were the servers. The day would not have taken off without the volunteers that hosted the gardens and the garden club members who worked behind the scenes. To all mentioned here, a great big thank you. In addition, the Elmhurst Garden Club wants to thank the many local businesses that donated sponsorships and the many residents who contributed, helping us earn $19,000. The money will go primarily to college scholarships to Illinois residents majoring in science. Money will also go to the Elmhurst Public School Horticulture Conservation Programs, the Churchville Schoolhouse, the YMCA camp programs, Elmhurst Library, the Elmhurst College Arboretum, the Elmhurst Memorial Hospital Children's Garden, and the Elmhurst Park District horticulture projects. As a 49-year resident, I'm truly proud of my city. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. Very nice.
John Robiletti, 625 West Gladys.
John Rebeletti, 625 West Gladys. This is to the Finance Committee. I would like to know, when are you going to vote on the bill or whatever you call it for the seniors that make over 26.3 and the state's is 27.6? When is this going to be voted on? It's been at least a year and 4 months since I brought this up, and all you keep saying, next meeting, next meeting, next meeting, but it never comes up. But when taxes come up, or raising your water or garbage, it's brought up in one meeting and voted on the next. When is this going to be done? I'd sure like to know.
Thank you, Mr. Rebeletti.
Terry Alexander, 586 South Hawthorne.
Good evening. I'd like to talk about the electrical outage. I really feel that this has been going on for so many years, and it's so frustrating for all of us. In my neighborhood, which is the west side of Hawthorne, from the Prairie Path to Madison, where we've had an extended outage last week for 3 days, this consistently happens, and I would really like to hear some ideas about what can really solve this problem. And I think one of my other neighbors is going to propose some ideas, but I really want you all to know that this is a concern for myself and many of my neighbors.
Thank you.
Bob Jocelyn, 591 Berkeley.
Well, pretty much the same issue, the power outage again. And as I said, as Terry said, our next neighbor, excuse me, our next neighbor will be talking a little bit more on hopefully some questions that you might be able to answer for us. I do want to make everyone aware that as voters in the community, we are going to be holding our alderman and mayor responsible for doing something. I've been here close to 30 years now. Prior to moving here, I lived in Africa, and I never had the long outages and that was 7 years in Africa before I moved here. I can't believe this is not a third world country. So let's get on ComEd, or change ComEd, or find another neighborhood to live in, I suppose. But I don't want to move. I'm not ready to retire yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys.
Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys. Good evening, all. I, as John, begin to wonder what the Finance Committee's doing. The city was kind enough to vote in $10,000 to pay back the extra taxes to residents that had a particular income. Unfortunately, whoever set the standards of income in Elmhurst forgot to look at the state or the federal government's regulations on it. Now we've been here off and on bringing the subject up. We've talked to aldermen, no, it's going to be worked on, it's going to be talked about and everything else. But then again, I tend to read the newspaper. And I can understand why the Finance Committee is having a hard time. It's got to pay a lot of legal fees. We got a citizens that have been flooded out, and he plans on suing you, so you're going to have to get some squawk box over there to deal with him. Then you got the EPA on your case, and got to talk with him. Another judicial little problem. Then we find out that an officer hired by the city of Elmhurst and a young woman got into a little mix, and looks like we got to settle that issue too. So maybe the Finance Committee doesn't want to part with any money. But on the other hand, the total amount they kicked out last year was about $2,600. For whatever reason, it can never reach this council. The council members can't discuss it. And all I hear is, when the Finance Committee finally comes up and makes its mind, well, let it make up its mind. Either publicly come out and say we're not going to increase the fee and the rest of the people are going to have to go swimming, or maybe you didn't listen to what the students from York High School just said, your population isn't rich. There's a portion of the population out there that's growing. And they're not asking you to give them the whole tax bite back. But if it doesn't come out of the Finance Committee, and no alderman is willing to bring the thing up for discussion, then I guess those that can't afford will just have to continue not to afford. Because we do have all these bills starting to build up, don't we?
Thank you, Claude.
Virginia Diamond, 587 Berkeley.
Hi, I guess I'm the neighbor that's supposed to come up with the solutions to the ComEd situation. I know that Elmhurst itself does not have a lot to do with how rates are set with Commonwealth Edison and how restrictions are put on what they can and can't do. But as a community, we have some leverage that as individual customers of ComEd we don't have. What I would like to see Elmhurst do is to band together, particularly the city council and the mayor, and talk to our state legislatures and say, it's a good thing that Quinn is going to veto this bill, because this bill that's up for the smart grid that they're putting in that's going to cost us, the consumers, $2.6 billion, does not include enough in terms of penalties to Commonwealth Edison for long-term power outages. And we need to put in some penalties like some neighboring states have for long-term outages. What we need to do is to work with our state legislature to come up with some legislation that controls Commonwealth Edison's rates, because that's where the rates are controlled, is through this legislation with the state, that the state puts in, to put some disincentives in there for them to continuing these long power outages, and to give them a financial reason to start doing the one thing that they can do to help prevent these outages, and that's to bury the overhead lines. Right now, they're not going to do that because right now there's no financial reason for them to do so. We need to help give them that financial reason. And I would look to all of you and everybody in Elmhurst to try to do something to give them that incentive to make Commonwealth Edison be put in a position where suddenly it makes financial sense for them to start doing this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Darlene Heslop, 200 North Michigan Avenue, number 227.
Before Darlene goes, I would just ask in the future if we just kind of hold back on applauses for each individual person. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank the students that came from York today. As a mentor in the school district, I know how important this help is to the students and to the families, and in particular the ones that I've had relationships with. So I wanted to thank them for doing that tonight. But on another note, as a resident who comes to city council meetings, what are some reasonable expectations that a person should have coming to city council? Should one expect favoritism, unfairness, discrimination, bullying, harassment, a continued infringement of First Amendment rights? Those of you who are elected to serve, this is the reality. It doesn't matter if you like that resident. It doesn't matter whether you agree with that resident. But what does matter is if you have the courage and the conviction to represent that resident to the best of your abilities, even if that person is considered the town pariah. Nothing less is and should be acceptable. At the last city council meeting, I was called out by name yet again and reprimanded. The entire dais, as well as the vast majority of the resident at that time, the audience at that time, was doing exactly what I was deliberately, consciously, and publicly chastised for. Why only me? Why not anybody else? Why not the dais? How come one resident was allowed 3 minutes, 46 seconds without interruption during public comment, and I was stopped at 2 minutes, 50 seconds and told that I needed to finish up? My expectations are that if the chairperson running this meeting can't do it right, then it's time for the rest of you to make sure that it does, including the alderman of the 4th Ward where I live. You may not like me, you may not agree with me, but your job is still to represent me and protect my rights. Failure to do this, and you are just as culpable and just as guilty. I hope that this is not too much to ask, and I really hope that this is the last time that I have to bring this up ever again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heslop.
And last, we have Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine Street.
Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine Street. I've been coming for actually more than a year, but when you think about a year, a lot of times people do it at the new year. I'm doing it because a new year is going to be starting for us next week. And it's part of the reason why we have large attendance tonight with a huge, large task force, because about a year ago is when 9 feet of water were in my basement. And when last year I was coming back from vacation and my neighbors were going on vacation, and last year all we did was say, can you make sure the plants get watered? You know, can we make sure the lawn's cut, the garbage is out, the mail comes in? And this year we're saying things like, let's make sure all the stuff is off the basement floor and on the high shelves. Let's make sure that we all know where the keys are so we can get into the pumping supplies in each other's houses. Make sure we know where the drop cloths are. So let's not forget why we're here, because it is time. We've done a couple of projects in the Fourth Ward in the last year from a public works standpoint. Both that I can think of are parking, one by Haven and First, and one by East End Park, both of which have brand new impervious surfaces where there used to be grass and land. We really need to think about pervious surfaces when we're putting in parking or other public works projects right now so that they can absorb some more of the water, because those drains that we put in over there at Haven and First are shooting the water right straight to our neighborhood where it's going to come up because we're the low point. And we just don't really want that to happen again. We've got to keep thinking about that. We have a couple of questions that we hope are raised and answered in the presentation, if not today, at the next one, with regards to whether or not the things that changed since 1987, such as the backyard drains program, such as the gutters being connected to the stormwater systems, if those things are rushing water to the system that didn't do so in 1987 and therefore causing our houses to flood. We don't really want our houses to flood. We'd like that all to stop. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the public forum, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I will close the public forum portion of our meeting at this time, and I will go, before I go on to our comprehensive flood plan update, which is going to be presented by Dr. Burke. First of all, I'd like to allow some of the folks that this presentation will be at least an hour. So some of the students that may, if you want to stay, you're more than welcome to. You got your families. If you'd like to stay, great. If you'd like to, sometimes people feel funny leaving in the middle of a meeting. I'll give you a little bit of break to leave if you'd like to, but you're welcome to stay. You'll get a civics lesson on storm and sanitary water if you'd like. So. While the room is clearing, there is question of we'll be able to ask questions during this presentation. Because of the fact that it is an intensive, over an hour-long presentation, I would encourage that we have the task force here after this meeting is finished. The task force is going to break into their subcommittees. I would encourage the task force to look at the presentation, to absorb it. Many of us, actually all of us, have not seen it yet either. Formulate questions. There are some that have already been formulated, and we've given those to Dr. Burke from some of the Southside residents. We will have subsequent workshops and committee meetings for the task force. I would encourage those intensive questions to be asked in the task force committee or workshop in the future. And I will leave questions for the dais open tonight. If people have questions, naturally, the alderman will be able to go ahead and ask those. With that, Dr. Burke, we're all ears.
Good evening. I'm going to start out by just summarizing. We're going to do two separate presentations. The first presentation will be by Al Hallenbeck, the president of RJN. You may recall Al made the overview as to where he stood I will pick up on the storm sewer side in my presentation. I will say that we endeavored to provide a lot of material, as you mentioned. It's going to be an hour. We will do our best to stay within that time frame. What we elected to do is to provide more information, as much as we can, as an update as to where we stand on the project status, and give a lot of specificity. So with that, I'll turn it over to Al to begin the presentation with the discussion of the sanitary sewer investigation as update.
Before Al takes the presentation, go ahead, Al. I wanted to mention that there are going to be some explanations and some solutions that are going to be coming up here, which is going to require some intergovernmental help, meaning we may be looking for retention areas, and we may not have city land available. There may be park district land available or school district land available. We have not even approached any of the local governmental entities, so I don't want, so everybody to understand this. Again, this is the first time we're seeing it. When they do come up with some options, we'll be discussing these options with our local school district, our local park district. If there's any issues where we can deal with a forest preserve or county, naturally be working with those issues, those levels of government as well too. But just so we have not even gone there yet, because this is the first time we're seeing it. Al, take it away.
Okay, mic working now?
Yep.
Back in April, we primarily talked about the tasks that we were going to perform to identify solutions to sanitary sewer backups in Elmhurst. What I wanted to focus on today is what do we know that we didn't know back in April. Well, what we know is primarily a function of three key activities we've been performing. The first one is the flow metering program. The second one is a sample program of manhole inspections. And finally, data analysis of private sector sources of infiltration inflow. From the flow metering program, we've been able to identify now what areas of Elmhurst contribute the most clear water into the system. The manhole inspection program has told us something about the condition of the sanitary sewer manholes. And finally, the data analysis has told us where is the clear water coming from, that distinction between public property and private property. This April, we initiated a 10-week program of flow metering in the sanitary sewer system. We installed 18 flow meters throughout Elmhurst to measure the system response to rainwater. I think most of you are aware that we had a very wet spring. During the period the flow meters were in, we had almost 16 inches of rain, 15 recordable storm events, 6 of those events over 3/10 of an inch of rain in a 3-hour period. When we do flow metering, we're looking to see how the system responds to a storm event. And it's that ratio of the peak flow to the average drive flow that tells us how much clear water is getting into the sanitary sewer. That ratio of peak flow to dry flow can also be used as an indicator of our ability to remove clear water from the system. As a result of the 15 storm events that we were able to record this spring, we were able to do a very accurate correlation between rainfall and inflow in the system. What that will mean is a very accurate computer model to tell us how the system will respond to severe storm events and what backups we'll be able to prevent with different recommended plans. The peaking factors that we determined from this spring were somewhat lower in the north side of Elmhurst, somewhat higher on the south side. At the same time, anytime we see a peaking factor in excess of 10, that indicates that we have a very severe clear water problem. And furthermore, it's not just the areas that have high clear water flow that are going to experience basement backups. What we found from the spring flow monitoring is actually southeast Elmhurst, east of York Road, which has not typically experienced basement backups, is a major contributor to peak flows in southwest Elmhurst and a major contributor to basement backups. So it's not just the area in southwest Elmhurst that has high clear water contributions to sanitary sewers. It's also areas east of York Road. And if we're going to address problems for basement backups in southwest Elmhurst, we cannot ignore the clear water east of York Road. That concentration of basement backups in southwest Elmhurst is the sum total of clear water sources in southwest Elmhurst, as well as areas to the east of York Road. We were also able to update the activation history for the emergency sanitary overflows. Now, these emergency sanitary overflows were designed to activate under severe storm events to allow diluted wastewater to enter the storm sewer instead of backing up into homes. A number of these emergency overflows have activated close to 20 times in the period of records that we analyzed. Our computer model will be able to accurately tell us when these ESOs activate, and that they will be a very important component of a plan to reduce basement backups. The city has an overhead sewer program. The overhead sewer program started in 1997. The initial reimbursement was $3,000. It was raised to $5,000. A total of 128 homes have been completed. Almost $500,000 has been expended through that program, and there are currently no homes on the waiting list. Remember that the overhead sewer program is primarily designed to prevent backups into the individual home. Part and parcel to the overhead sewer program, there's typically a disconnection of the clear water sources from that home. So there is some ancillary benefit of every home for which an overhead sewer is performed. These are also very expensive and disruptive types of construction. And they're going to present us collectively, the task force as well as the elected officials, with some policy decisions. Should the overhead sewer program be continued? Should the cost sharing be modified, raised, or lowered? And should all requests be honored, or only those that we can't resolve in other mechanisms with improvements to the sanitary sewer system? Those homes that are the lowest in the system, relationship to the sewer line, are going to be the most challenged.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair? I was wondering if the speaker, when he does use his laser, could he use it on both screens? Because folks on this side of the room can't see what you're circling. Okay. Appreciate it. Thanks.
It's those homes then that are higher in the system, aren't quite as low, even though they've had backups, that are most likely to be resolved with long-term solutions. We talked a little bit last time about a backflow protection alternative to the overhead sewer program. That involves the installation of a cleanout in the yard, replacing the existing cleanout that has a check valve in it. That prevents wastewater from backing up into the home. It's a passive device. No power is required. But we can't use it when there's clear water sources on the same home. If there's a foundation drain, a storm sump, or any kind of clear water source, we can't use the clean check valve. Right now, we looked at about 365 homes that had reported either sanitary backup or unknown flooding source. It would appear there's about 75 candidates right now for the clean check solution because they do not have clear water sources in the home. Again, policy decisions. Should the city add clean check valves to the reimbursement program? If so, what level of cost sharing should be provided? And again, should all requests be honored? We conducted a sample manhole inspection program this spring trying to identify if the public manholes were a significant source of this clear water to the sanitary sewer system. We identified manholes in the most vulnerable position, along the creeks, where there had been main sewer lining, old age manholes. The general conclusion based on the sample is those manholes that were rehabilitated back in the late 80s were in generally good condition. Based on that sample, they do not appear to be a significant part of the clear water problem in the sanitary sewer system. If we look at the clear water sources into the sanitary sewer, they break up into the public sector and the private sector. So far, we feel that we cannot make a case that manholes are a large source. Well, the other part of the public sector sewer system are the main sewers. We're going to be doing some smoke testing this August to identify if there are leaks, cracks, or cross connections in the main sewer that might be contributing clear water. All the evidence we've gathered to date, though, is pointing us more and more at private property as the primary source of clear water into the sanitary sewer system. These are interior sources, sump pumps and foundation drains, exterior sources, driveway drains, stairwell drains, patio and area drains, as well as the service lateral from the home out to the main sewer in the street. We'll be conducting the smoke testing in South Elmhurst. We're going to be doing about 30,000 feet, slightly under 4% of the system. We have to do this at low groundwater dry conditions, just the opposite of the conditions that we wanted this spring during the flow monitoring. What are we going to be looking for? We're going to be looking for cross connections between the storm sewer and the sanitary, allowing clear water from the storm sewer to come back into the sanitary sewer. We're going to be looking for private property exterior driveway drains and area drains. And then we'll project these results to the balance of the system and determine if additional smoke testing is warranted. We're trying to identify where the clear water is getting into the system. The smoke testing will help us address that question for the public sector sanitary sewers. These are examples of the kind of cross connections we found in other neighboring communities and the kind of driveway, stairwell, and area drains that we found in similar smoke testing programs. Typically, what we see in Illinois, in northern Illinois, is about 50% of the clear water is from the private sector, about half that pie. All the evidence right now that we've gathered to date in Elmhurst indicates that that private sector component is much more than 50%. It probably is in the order of 75%, if not greater, of the total clear water entering the sanitary sewer. We'll be able to refine that estimate when we get done with the smoke testing program. So if that's the nature, if that's the source of the clear water into the sanitary sewer, then we're going to have to develop alternatives to address the removal of that clear water from private property. Back in the 80s, the city elected not to eliminate certain types of clear water sources to the sanitary sewer. Those included combination sump pumps, stairwell, window well, driveway drains, and directly connected foundation drains. These are the most expensive and sometimes the most challenging private sector sources to eliminate. As an example, there's many homes in Elmhurst that have laundry tubs in the basement discharging to what we call a combination sump pump. We also have in that same sump pump the footing tile draining clear water around the foundation. All of that is pumped to the sanitary sewer. So we have normal domestic wastewater mixed with clear water being pumped into the sanitary sewer. The directly connected foundation drain is another common source of clear water, particularly in South Elmhurst. Tile around the foundation of the home flows by gravity directly into the sanitary sewer. There is no sump pump. It's strictly gravity flow. When there's a large storm event, you get rain off the roof, you get groundwater, and these directly connected foundation drains can contribute 5 gallons a minute under a 1-year storm to the sanitary sewer. They're significant sources of this clear water that is causing sanitary sewer backups. Just as an example, the area tributary to the Sailor and Jackson lift station, we call it Basin 24, has a very high concentration in red of the directly connected foundation drains, in blue in the combination sumps. And you can see the high concentration of homes with clear water sources into the sanitary sewer, as well as the reverse slope driveway drains.
Question? Can you go back to that? How do you know that? Is that based on the year of the home, or is that something else that you know that?
These homes were all inspected in the late 80s. Internal inspections. There is a very low likelihood that unless there was a tear down and a reconstruction, that a home that had a directly connected footing tile in the 80s would have changed that. Without reinspection, is this 100% accurate? No, but I believe it is pretty close to what we'll end up seeing.
Thank you.
The reverse slope driveway drains are a particular problem in southwest Elmhurst. They, again, were not removed in the 80s. They were classified as legal, non-conforming sources. They contribute a very high flow rate of clear water, particularly if there's an overtopping of the street and sidewalk, and you actually have flooding inducing inducing an elevation on top of those driveway drains. That can cause a huge both local and regional impact on clear water in the system. There is a high concentration of these drains in southwest Elmhurst. Again, another example of clear water source on private property, which also kicks off another set of policy decisions.
Yeah, I'll get one question real quick. Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I want to thank both you and Dr. Berg for presenting this information. It's the first time we're seeing it, so I apologize for any novice questions up front, but I guess next time we'll try to get this a little bit in advance. For the slide on page, well, it's probably not up there, but on our page 18, where Alderman Healy was referencing the Basin 24 private sector sources, the map with all the different colors. Thank you. Where is that basin located? Is it southeast, southwest Elmhurst? Did we have this data prior to your investigation? And then the third part of the question would be, what is your current theory, if you have one, if this is contributing to the overall south side flooding?
Okay, I'll get to that last question when I finish my presentation. This data on private property sources is driven by inspections that were conducted in the late 80s going into the homes. Really, same answer as I gave before.
Where is it?
Where is it? It's the area tributary to the Sailor and Jackson pump station, so it would
Sailor and Jackson.
it would be the far northwest corner would be Sailor and Jackson, and then be like 6 blocks to the east and 5 blocks to the south. At the same time, this exhibit isn't unique for southwest Elmhurst. This is just an example of the concentration of private property clear water. We just cited it as one example, in a relatively confined area because it had a higher concentration of the driveway drains. If you look at the direct foundation drain connections, many of the other basins in southwest Elmhurst would just have just as much red as this one does.
I would encourage, if we could, to jot down our questions, all council members, and try to ask these at the end so we can get through this. If you absolutely have something, we'll break in, but I'd like, just out of time, I'd like to make sure.
I mean, Alderman Healy asked the question,
I know,
so I
I'm-
thought that
I'm-
was the format.
I just, after we got a couple, I just thought I would ask if we can jot those down, and we'll go back. Okay? Thank you. Thanks, Al.
Again, the policy decisions on private sector sources. Should the city add these private sector sources to the reimbursement program? If so, what level of cost sharing should be provided? And then how much time should be allowed for removal of the sources? Our remaining tasks, as I mentioned, we intend to do the smoke testing, dry weather holds in August. That will allow us to complete the hydraulic modeling of both the sewers and the emergency sanitary overflows. At that point, we'll be able to analyze alternatives with costs as well as an assigned level of protection. We'll investigate grant funding opportunities, and we'll absolutely look at green infrastructure solutions, including rain gardens. The disconnection of clear water sources from a home with a discharge to the backyard has caused localized ponding in the past in Elmhurst. A rain garden is a great opportunity to limit backyard flooding as a result of disconnection of clear water sources. That will bring us then to the report and final analysis phase of our work. There are really two overall mechanisms to prevent basement backups and reduce bypassing. We can get the clear water out of the system, or we can convey it and treat it. Getting the clear water out of the system, although there will be some public sector component, I have a better feel for that after we do the smoke testing, it appears that this solution will have to focus on private property clear water source reduction. Overhead sewers and the clean check backflow prevention is really not a major contributor to reducing clear water. It can be used in some cases, particularly to expedite homes that have chronic backups until long-term solutions can be implemented. Conveying and treating this wastewater by upgrading lift stations, adding storage and additional relief sewers, and upgrading the treatment plant are typically extremely expensive solutions. We will cost these solutions, but we have the added challenge that the city has an MPDES permit for its wastewater treatment plant. The likelihood of getting that treatment plant permit modified to have a higher flow rate discharge to Salt Creek is not zero, but it's fairly low. That is going to put more and more pressure on the clear water flow reduction side of the equation. However, we will cost all of these alternatives in the next phase of our project. Ultimately, we'll be looking for that point where costs start to escalate very dramatically in relationship to the number of basement backups that we can prevent. That cost-benefit analysis is something that's done very often in this field to find the point at which we've identified a level of protection that can be justified for the costs that are expended. We're going to define that level of protection not only from the typical storm recurrence interval, the 10-year, 25, 50-year storm, but also storm of record. And Burke is doing the same thing on the storm side. As I said, we're going to incorporate any available grants and loans, particularly the Illinois Green Infrastructure Grant Program. We are on schedule to deliver these results concurrent with the original schedule we provided. we'll be done with the smoke testing in August, weather permitting. That will allow us to finalize alternatives with costs so that then policy decisions can be made with all of that information available. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Burke for the storm sewer side.
Thank you, Al.
Okay, I'd like to say a couple things before I start. It's been about 11 and a half months since I first came to this building to speak to a lot of the same people that were there at various times I presented material. What we did today, and hopefully it comes across, we have pushed ahead some of the tasks that I'm going to report on. We're going to provide a lot of data. I apologize. I've already apologized to some of the task force members who said the black and white copies, they cannot see all the material, and I apologize for that. The color presentation is available, and we'll coordinate with the city staff. What we've done today is to provide some specificity on 5 of the 10 study areas. You recall that we were charged in our proposal to look at 10 study areas. We have selected 5 of them because if we provided all 10, we'd be here even longer. We've concentrated, we've not taken the low-hanging fruit, we've taken Southwest Elmhurst and provided the details on that area. I want to point out that, as you're going to see, there's been an extensive amount of modeling that has taken place, and I will from time to time refer to my staff members that are here in various locations in the audience that have spent the last couple months modeling in detail these 5 areas. Let me say a couple of other things. What we're going to be doing is solving the flooding. If we all were able to develop Elmhurst the way that we would like it to be built today, knowing everything we know about stormwater management, I think it's fair to say that we probably would not recommend as elected officials or engineers reverse slope driveways. That probably would not have been a good measure. We would design these areas a lot different. And one of the things that you're going to see, and you recall in my presentations, we were talking about the fact that in modern stormwater management, you want the water to flow downhill. Rather than getting really high in the streets and flooding homes, you want it to flood and cascade down, in this case, down to the creek, if we were able to do that. Right now, we're faced with a storm sewer system that has a finite capacity, and we have SAGs, or depressional areas, that accumulate water and cause the flooding that we're going to see. So today, I would like to go through these areas. I'm going to try to get just enough detail to let you know what we've done. I pushed forward some of the results. I hope it doesn't backfire for me. We've tried to get you the latest information that we've put together for these study areas. What we've done, and as part of our work, we did computer modeling, not because we're married to computers, but because the computers allow us to simulate solutions, identify what's out there today, and anybody that was watching the flooding that occurred back in the in 2010 in June and July know that water was coming from different directions. It's coming out of manholes. It's flooding different ways. So what we did is we took, as we mentioned before, we had a lot of questionnaires. We had your GIS. We had as-built. We had the pump station plans. The Southwest Elmhurst is drained and relies in most events for the pumping of the stormwater to Salt Creek. You remember the presentation where we identify those pump stations, the capacities, the locations, the standby power. So we had to incorporate the operation of those into our computer models. We also did field investigations. My staff has been out there numerous times. In addition, we developed a computer model. And in order to simulate this, in order to do what we said, what you guys asked us to do to make sure it was comprehensive, We looked at the drainage area that contributes runoff, the areas that drain downhill to the flood-prone areas. We delineated that. We looked at the topographic information, obtained storm sewer information, and that one term, just to let you know, runoff curve number is a measure of the relative imperviousness of the land use. Time of concentration is a term that says how long it takes for the water to get to certain areas. We use the US EPA-based XP SWIM model, and we looked at the July event as well as some design events. Let me just touch on this because engineers were kind of married to these terms. The general public doesn't like the term 100-year, but let's just revisit this because we did bracket some of the solutions and identified 100-year has a 1 in 100 or 1% chance of occurring annually, so we've identified those, the recurrence intervals and the probabilities. But what we did is for each one of those return periods that, and I'm going to try to coordinate with Luke, who's going to be identifying, and those are the return periods of storms that we looked at. Just so you know, the 10-year storm is used to define a rainfall event that has a 10% chance of occurring. This just gives some background information. A lot of the task force knows this, but for the council. The storm intensity and duration. There's a storm intensity as well as a storm duration. As an example, 2.1 inches in an hour is a 10-year event. If you get that in 15 minutes, it's a 100-year event. So it's not only the storm depth, it's also the duration that it fell in and therefore the intensity. So just to put everything in perspective, and I have shown these numbers before and I won't do it again, but the different storm events that have hit and wreaked havoc are put there as far as the depth and duration for your consideration. What we did is we took a look, and then what I said we obtained the information on the land that contributes runoff, and then we took a look at the conveyance system that provides, in some cases, limited capacity. We have length, diameter, material, inverted rim elevations of storm sewers. The computer model that we're using allows us to say when the storm sewer gets full and it's no longer, the runoff's no longer able to get into the storm sewer, where does it go? Because it goes downhill, and in this you're going to see we have exhibits with some arrows. It shows that it's going in lots of different directions and it's accumulating in the low spots. So even though some areas within town may not be flooding, they are contributing runoff that's flowing not only the storm sewer, but overland flow routes. So we had to look at that. I mentioned earlier the pumping station. We also identified flood storage. Now the flood storage, there's two types of flood storage. One is the intentional flood storage that we're going to suggest needs to be created, and then there's also the flood storage that many of you know too well, because it's just the water that fills in the depressional areas on the street. And what you're going to see is our objective is try to relocate that street flooding and put it in locations where it can be held without causing flooding of units. So we determined the flood levels. We looked at the level of protection for each of the existing area, what kind of protection's out there now, and determined the effectiveness of the proposed improvements. So what we want to do is simulate existing conditions and then start testing alternatives. Because we can't just say, go city, test some of these alternatives and we'll hope they work. We use this computer model to test the effectiveness of these alternatives. What we did is we have over 100 sub-basins. So we broke the study areas, the ones that we're talking about, broke them into 100 different areas so we can quantify the land use, the intensity, or the land use time of concentration. We also modeled and simulated the runoff into and through over 700 storm sewer segments, as well as the aforementioned overland flow routes. There's over 40 flood and depressional storage areas that we simulated, and 6 stormwater pumping stations. And this is all work that we've done since the last time that we've made a presentation to you. When I talk about the level of protection, it's important to refer back to this exhibit. for a given structure, and the structure is shown, we're not artists, in red is a typical house. And this is a storm sewer. The storm sewer has a finite level of capacity. What we've identified here is the flood levels associated with 2, 10, 50, and 100-year, how high the water would get for those flood events. And as an example, this home has, based on this, exhibit, has a 50-year level protection. That is, it's dry during events up to and including the 50-year. When it gets 100-year, it's inundated. So when we talk about a level protection, that's what we're referring to. If, as an example, we certainly have homes where the 2-year flood level hits at that level. So, and obviously for you that know what your neighborhood looks like, not everybody is at the same level. So the number of homes that are within this certain level of protection vary as you go down the block, and not everybody on the same block has the same level of protection, if that makes sense. Flood storage volume. I'm going to use a term, an acre foot. This is a term that's a little bit more convenient. That's 1 acre of land under 1 foot of water. So we think we know what an acre looks like. We think we know what a foot looks like, and so we can visualize an acre foot. That's equivalent. Just 1 acre foot is equivalent to 325,000 gallons. Those of us that have rain barrels, that's 5,900 rain barrels of 55 gallons each. If those of us that like 2-liter bottles, that's 616,000 2-liter bottles, and so on and so forth. Just to give you an idea, the Elmhurst Quarry has about 8,300 acre-feet of capacity. And I think many of you have seen that, but I'm trying to frame for your reference the volumes, because I'm going to be presenting a lot of volumes, and it's you're going to see very quickly why I'm not trying to say 1 million or 2 million or 3 million or 20 million gallons. That would just be a number we'd have trouble getting our arms around. Okay, what I'm going to do is start out by talking about the 5 areas. And the first area that I'm going to talk about is what we call the Pine Street Study Area. On this drawing, First Street is on the south, and let Luke start showing that. First Street is on the south, Robert Palmer on the west, 3rd Street on the north, and Avon on the east. This area was identified and as a flood-prone area, and we were asked to study this, and this is part of the area. This site, as you can see from the title there, has 116 pipes in it. It's about 90 acres of land that is tributary. So everything in that yellow drains to the green area, which is a flood-prone area. It's what we called, or I referred to earlier, as a depressional storage area. There is no designated overland flow route, and it's the outlet, the sewer is connected to a 48-inch storm sewer that goes to the east along First Street. So the lowest rims are on Pine Street, and that was our objective, was to see what would be necessary to address the flooding problem of Pine Street. To give you an idea, we simulated with the computer model the amount of flooding that occurred during the July 2010. That blue area is the approximate area based on the DuPage County topographic information, and under that blue area is about 18 acre-feet of storage. So that starts framing the problem. There's 18 acre-feet of water that is on the street and needs to be addressed, or that volume reduced somewhat to start addressing the problems. During the 2010 flood event, there was about 3.1 feet of flooding. There were 52 homes that are shown within this inundation area. Now, not every one is subject to flooding. I should make sure I point that out. That's based on the grades shown in the topographic data from DuPage County. That will be refined as we move forward during our study. The existing level of protection is a 2-year event. A 2-year, it fills up the storm sewer. You start seeing street ponding for anything greater than a 2-year, and you start to see flooding of structures, flooding of the homes when the storm events get greater than a 5-year. What we did is to look at alternative 1. We looked at, remember we were asked to look at different alternatives. For this Pine Street area, we looked at providing storage. Now, one of the things you're going to see on this drawing here is that we call this flood storage. That's different from upstream storage. And let me just take a second to explain. We have two types. Storage is not all created equal. What we want to do in some areas is provide storage upstream before the water gets to the flood-prone areas. And in other cases, we want to provide it downstream, or we're going to provide it whenever we have open space. So some cases, I'll call it flood storage, because that's at the downstream end. And if we didn't put it and just put bigger pipes, then you would just switch us from studying Pine Street to the areas downstream. So what we're trying to do is to provide storage in all the areas. My staff has looked at balancing out. Some cases it's called upstream storage. Some cases it's called flood storage. But in this particular case, what we needed to do is provide about 10 acre-feet. That's the reason why I wanted to explain what that is. And 10 acre-feet and lots of sewer. We have lots of relief sewer. Not someone's going to look at that and say, well, that doesn't look like 3,000 feet. Not all the sewers showed, and sometimes it's 2 sewers side by side. And the reason being is that we have a finite. We can't have sewers as speed bumps. They can't be coming out of the ground. And what happens here is that for lack of cover, we have to have parallel pipes. So in some cases, the number would be doubled. So that's 3,000 lineal feet is a total. If we put those sewers in and that 10 acre-feet, we're able to accomplish a 25-year level of protection for that Pine Street area. We looked at a second alternative, which was to extend out even more the Golden Meadow Park, and in this case provide 30 acre-feet, roughly the same amount of pipe, slightly larger, but this gets us a 100-year level protection. Let me also point out a term here, gravity drain flood storage. That means that the water would go in by gravity and flow out by gravity. The difference between that storage and some Elmhurst Quarry is a pump evacuated reservoir, as an example. The water comes in and then it sits there and then it's pumped out. So in some cases, in order to get the 100-year level protection, I've included pump evacuated reservoirs. So we have that term. So we have flood storage, pump evacuated reservoirs, and the upstream detention reservoirs. To the residents, they would all look the same. The reservoirs would, the gravity drained reservoirs would look all the same. Pump evacuated would be deeper because we need more storage. And what we've done and what we're going to be showing throughout this presentation is a lot of storage. And as I mentioned earlier, it shouldn't come as any surprise. I told you that we were looking at maximizing the storage in all the green areas. Regardless of who owned the green areas, we took a look at the topography, where those green areas were with respect to the overall watershed, and we tried to make them the outlet and the location where stormwater was going to be placed. Okay, now I'm going to discuss Southwest Elmhurst. Originally, we were going to look at 4 areas there. We've actually expanded our investigation because those of you that recall when we were talking about the scope, what we've done is expanded it to include the area, all the areas to the to the east of York Road. So one of the things that's important, there's a number of things that are important here. What we've done is we show the watershed divides in yellow. That's the area that would contribute on, we had rain probably about 4:30 this morning. That didn't cause too much runoff, and the runoff that did would be easily accommodated within those borders. So each one of those borders identify an area, and for you, those that can't see that, the upper one is about 389 acres. The second one, as we go from north to south, is 323 acres. Tributary area for the third one is 129, and the last one, the southerly tributary basin, is 162 acres. So that's a considerable amount of drainage area. And as you can see, because I need to give this is Butterfield here, here's York, just to give you an idea. So all this area here flows to the west and contributes runoff, not only through the storm sewer, but also through the red areas that these are arrows. These show where all the runoff goes. In some cases, especially right here where my pointer is at, is an area where we have significant interbasin flow, and we're going to be talking about the difficulty. So in this area, we have the Swain site, we have Spring and Harrison, Sailor Jackson, and Washington and Crescent. These are the areas that we've identified, at least bracketed. We try to show the extremes of providing flood relief to these areas. So let me start.
Go back. Did you explain what the green stars were?
Yes, the green stars refer to each one of those areas that I just described, the 5 study areas.
They're just there.
That's the center point. That's the. I'm not saying that's the only place that floods, but that's one of the flooded areas. So, but I also want to point out that the contributions from a lot of different areas are contributing to that flooding. So when we look at these projects, so once again, the overland flow routes are very important, and that's the reason why I mentioned earlier we spent a lot of time trying to come up with a computer model for those. During big events, the flow of stormwater, as I mentioned, goes across some of these boundaries. There are 367 pipe, this is a 367 pipe interconnected model using the operating curves at each one of those pumping stations. So again, this is an overview. Let's talk about the storm sewer inlets, the reason why we have so much water flowing from the east and over to the west. Many of the storm sewer inlets, the devices that everybody sees in their front yard, one of the reasons why those quickly get overwhelmed is it's providing, they are seeing in some cases up to 20 times the drainage area contributing, other drainage areas contributing to that. So what I'm going to show here is the flooding area on the north side, which is the simulation from the July 2010 event. I want to stop here just for a second to point out that staff is compiling for us some high water elevations, and we will be fine-tuning this representation. We want to make sure that we're accurately providing the best information. So as we move forward in our study, we are going to be calibrating even to a greater extent the actual inundation areas, but we're waiting for those high water marks to be surveyed. One of the things that you note in this, and we started, because we're running out of numbers, we call these with letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E. Here you see for the north side, C, D, and E, we've estimated the amount of storage that's being placed on the street. On the south side, Jackson Sailor being in the middle of that, the item B, flood area B, you can see that that's about 40 acre-feet of storage, and down to the south, we have another 11 acre-feet showing up. The Southwest study, Southwest side results here are kind of summarized as to the number of houses that were within those 5 problem ID areas that I just showed. There's 290 some odd homes, structures that are within that flooded area. The depth of flooding in this goes from 1.7 to 2.5 feet in depth. And once again, there are no overland flow routes. And the last column there identifies for each one of these areas the current level of protection before you start seeing streets surcharging. So that's a level of protection that's afforded for each one of those the storm sewers in each one of those existing areas. Now what we did, and I'll try to summarize because I know I'm going on here, we've summarized in the next dozen or so slides a significant number of alternatives. The important thing for each one of these alternatives, if I was looking at this, we want to stress that we have identified how much storage we can provide in each of the green areas that are within southwest Elmhurst. We took each one of those areas, and for the first alternative, we identified about 69 acre-feet of, this is the reason why I use this term, gravity drain upstream detention areas. These are storage areas that are located more in the upstream or uphill portion of the watershed. These would be gravity drain and they're upstream. They're trying to keep the water from draining into those 5 stars that I showed, where the 5 inundation areas, A, B, C, and D, and E, those areas. In order to provide 69 acre-feet of total storage, we would have to excavate out and provide at York Commons Park 36 acre-feet, the Early Childhood Elementary School 6, Bryan Middle School 18 acre-feet, and there's a vacant lot to the south there that we identify based on topography where we can place up to 9 acre-feet. In order to get the water to and from all these storage facilities, we need 5,300 feet of pipe, and we'd also have to use Luke show those 5 acre-feet of gravity drain at Christ United and Jackson Elementary School, which is Luke has identified. This, we also looked at, and what we've done, for alternative 1, is took a look at each one of those locations and provided gravity drained reservoirs. And we looked at what we could accomplish by doing that. So alternative 1 is providing gravity drain. All those parks we designed so they would be having gravity drains. We also looked at what we could accomplish and how much we would get to have an additional level protection. And in this particular case, we looked at 134 acre-feet. Once again, that's a lot of storage of pump evacuated upstream detention storage. We also, in order to get that additional storage, all the drainage there, we would have to construct more lineal feet of sewer than we did in alternative 1 and add, rather than 5, 18 acre-feet at Christ United Methodist Church and Jackson Elementary School, and that's the breakdown. So alternative 2 was more storage and using pump evacuated facilities. Pump evacuated obviously requires that Commonwealth Edison is involved, that you're providing electricity. The water comes in, you need to get it out of there, you are pumping it out. So my point in saying, comment, is that there's additional cost associated with pump evacuated reservoirs. Not only the initial cost, but long-term maintenance. Let me just summarize for those areas that we are looking at. We have those 5 problem areas with those designations A through E. I've identified the existing level of protection and the level of protection afforded by the alternative 1 and alternative 2. Alternative 1 gets you up to a 25-year. You're able to get a greater level of protection at some of the other areas, not as much as a Villette and Swain, which I'll talk about, but that's what you're able to achieve with alternatives 1 and 2. Let me talk about the alternative number 3, and that is to provide a 100-year level protection for problem area D. Problem area D, what we did was to look at providing 42 acre-feet of gravity drain flood storage. This is not pump evacuated storage. We would provide 6,700 lineal feet. This would provide a 100-year level of flood protection at Washington Street, but require the increased pumping capacity at Berkeley and Adams. During the presentation on the storm sewer system, during the presentation on Salt Creek, it was emphasized that there was the city is limited to how much storm water can be pumped out of your stormwater pumping stations. That is by permit from the state. Who would be interested in you if you started just doubling the capacity of the pumping stations? Everybody downstream. Just like if you heard that everybody upstream was doubling their pumping rates, you would be concerned in Elmhurst. I think that's pretty common sense. But what we did is take a look at what we would need to do. We would significantly have to increase the pumping capacity in order to offset those impacts of the additional pumping. We would have to find a location downstream along Salt Creek, an open space, where we would park the water rather than allowing it to flood people downstream. But in order to be complete and not to leave anybody out or minimize the number of people that offended, we looked at what we would have to do at this stage, and we're going to be refining all these alternatives. I want to stress that. We're refining all these alternatives, but this is what we would need to do. Staff have pointed out that they recall the difficulty in getting that even permitted back and after the late 80s and early 90s, and so they wanted me to stress again the difficulty in getting an increase in the pumping capacity at Berkeley and Adams. Okay, alternative number 4, to provide 100-year level protection for problem area A. In this particular case, we looked at what was necessary to provide additional storage at these 2 locations here at Bryan Middle School and the vacant lot. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody by just calling it a vacant lot. What we looked at is to provide that storage and increase the pumping capacity at the Harrison Street station. And once again, the same caveat I gave for the other project that provided 100-year level protection. I want to put the same caveat. That would increase the flows in downstream and would require off-site compensatory storage, which is another term, and I'm sorry, but there are distinctions. It's compensatory storage at an off-site downstream on Salt Creek to mitigate those impacts. Now, let me touch on the areas to the north. We looked at alternatives there. The first one was to provide 14 acre-feet of upstream detention storage on York Commons Park. This would require restrictors, and I haven't gone through a lot of talk about restrictors, but we have pipes to make sure that the flows downstream are not increased when you see that term in some of these slides. This provides a 5-year level of flood protection at the Swain-Villette area and a 5-year level of flood protection for Crescent Avenue, Cambridge. We looked at alternative 2, which provided 15 acre-feet of storage, about 400 feet of pipe. This gave us only a 5-year level protection at Swain-Villette and a 10-year level protection at Crescent, Cambridge. We looked at alternative 3, which included more relief sewers, a large relief sewer along McKinley Avenues from Swain Avenue to the pump station that it required us not only to provide a large storm sewer to that pump station, but increase the capacity of the McKinley Avenue pump station. This is the only way to get the increased capacity. So therefore, the same caveats I gave for the other 2 alternatives, which included upgrading to the pump station, I want to make sure I give again. That is off-site compensatory storage to mitigate those impacts, increased flows to Salt Creek. The last area that I want to touch on is the Seminole Avenue study area. This is a 17-pipe area. This is 179 acres of land. It drains to a low spot on Seminole and Cottage Hill via storm sewer and the overland flow routes, those red arrows that I talked about earlier. Single 48-inch pipe outlets this low spot with no overland flow route. That means that you're taking approximately 180 acres of land and draining it through a single 48-inch pipe. So we know that this is the approximate area in the Seminole Avenue study area that was inundated. This had about 3 acre-feet of flood storage. During the event, there were approximately 5 homes that identified flooding. The existing level of protection is a 10-year event. Structural flooding occurs as soon as that existing level of protection is exceeded. What we did is we looked at alternatives to address this flooding. The first one included construction of a gravity drain flood control storage facility, 7 acre-feet at Pioneer Park. We were also needed to construct 1,300 feet of sewer to get the water from the flood-prone intersection to the Pioneer Park. And this gives us, by doing that, by providing the additional storage, we were able to get the 100-year level protection. So by this particular case, we were able to provide by providing, in this case, it's gravity drain flood storage at Pioneer Park. We were able to get the Seminole study area to a 100-year level protection. There is one more area, and that's a Yorkfield study area. There's 20 pipes included in this roughly 250-acre area. This particular area, there's a low spot at Butterfield and Chatham Avenue near the entrance to the subdivision. And once again, when the 48-inch pipe surcharges, we have overland flow down Chatham into the subdivision, and the runoff from the neighborhood drains to the detention basin that's located south of Harrison, and Luke is showing where that is located. This particular area is the area of inundation is shown here. This shows about 9 acre-feet of flood storage in this area based on the 2010 July event simulation. In this area, we had 11 homes that were flooded. 5 of these homes had reverse slope driveways. Reverse slope driveways are problematic because the level of flooding that you can allow on the street is very low. You can allow for only very small amounts of flooding on the street before the water starts flowing down the driveways towards the homes. The existing level protection in this area is a 10-year event, and we have street ponding at Yorkfield Avenue for events greater than that. What we did is we looked at the possibility of expanding the detention basin located on Harrison Street onto the vacant lot and providing additional 5 acre-feet of storage. We need about 400 feet of pipe to get that water to that basin, and this provides level protection from the existing level protection of 10-year to a 100-year level protection. We also looked at another alternative that would construct, rather than expanding it by excavating, you would look at changing the side slopes to retaining walls and the like. So that's just a different variation. It still provides the same level protection. One thing I want to point out on all these detention basins, unless specifically identified, the detention basins were constructed with a 4-to-1 side slope for the gravity drains. Engineers love that term. 4-to-1 side slope means it's 4 horizontal to 1 vertical. It's something that most of us can, mow with a lawnmower. A 3-to-1 side slope for the pump evacuated areas was done. So we knew that the usefulness of some of those pump evacuated areas would be diminished, and therefore we did not include that. Just to make sure, I'm not sure if I said that earlier. The detention, one of the things that you've seen is that we need, depending on the level of protection, a lot of storage. And it's a rather daunting number. And someone's going to ask me, and I'll say it now, I don't have a cost estimate right now. We're at the point, we've moved up this analysis a month. You can see from our schedule, we pushed this up. We wanted to get some ideas so the council can start thinking about the orders of magnitudes of the volumes that we need to solve the flooding problems in this area. But I also know that people are going to suggest those are outrageous numbers. And I wanted to put this in the perspective of if we were going back to the city of Elmhurst, if it was being developed today, how much detention storage would be required? Because after all, any development that's taken place since 1992 in DuPage County has had to provide a uniform level of protection. So if you're in Wooddale, if you're in Naperville, wherever you live, you have to provide a certain amount of detention storage to offset the impacts of urbanization. That's just a fact of life. There's no variation. There's no punitive, meaning going back in time and making anybody that didn't do these things. But just to put in perspective, for each one of these flood-prone areas, we tried to identify the amount of storage that you would have to provide. So that first column gives you an idea of how much detention storage will be required, how much we're looking at for the 100-year level protection, and ratios. And when we're looking at preliminary estimates, you're always trying to look for residential development, somewhere about 0.35 acre feet of storage per acre development for new. So these are not outrageous. The difficulty is to retrofit areas to provide the storage and the storm sewers that convey the water from those inundation areas to the storage areas. That's why we included the lineal feet. I also want to point out that when we showed on red on some of those exhibits, the pipe, as I want to stress, some of those are double and some of them are big pipes. What you're trying to do is mimic that overland flow route that I mentioned at the outset that is not there, and we're trying to mimic it to keep the water moving out. The next things that we're going to do in refining these numbers is to use, as I said, the high water elevations that the staff is collecting. We're also going to be refining these numbers, trying to get an idea of, do we need to go to 100-year level protection, provide to the aldermen how many homes are left. When you may want to go from a 50 to 100, but by providing that 25 acre feet of storage, you're only protecting one house. So there is some implications, not from cost effectiveness, but just from the utilization of funds and the effectiveness of those funds. So that's as I think I mentioned this earlier about the flood storage areas. I just want to summarize. These are the 8 flood storage areas that we're looking at south and northeast Elmhurst. These are the storage areas. I've described for you the different volumes. This shows you and the 2 types. That's why I said gravity drain. Gravity drain is deep. The storage volume that you're providing in that, the necessary storage volume is deep. You're still able to drain those by gravity, but if you're pump evacuated, those are going to be deep facilities. They're probably going to have to be dewatered, and the feasibility of providing those pump evacuated reservoirs has to be investigated, because in some cases we'll encounter high groundwater conditions, in some cases we'll encounter unsuitable soils. So there's due diligence that is necessary, especially on the pump evacuated reservoirs. This is some other information on the storage facilities. Let me just talk about direct connections, because I know that that's been asked about and talked about. As many of you know, originally sump pumps from the homes were tied into the combined sewers. When the sewers were separated, many of these connections were still left connected to the sanitary sewer. And Al has talked about the impact that those footing drains have. As part of the sump pump disconnection program, the city asked those sump pumps to be discharged over land into side yards and front yards. And that, a lot of people have been talking about, let's do that again. You can do that again, but one of the things we want to make sure that everybody remembers, because we always want to remember the past, because in this particular article, it describes how many people were impacted by the number 725 residents. There were 725 complaints about stormwater from the homes that were disconnected, when the sump pumps were disconnected and the footing drains, when they were discharging onto the grass, onto the street, or into the backyard. There's some quotes there from angry residents. So similar to my comment earlier about not wanting to exchange one group of concerned residents with another, we've looked at this issue and have come up with a slight variation. And this, of course, is something that people have described. To give you an idea, those 3 basins on the south side, southwest side of Elmhurst, that those 3 the 4 basins, the lower southern basins, have about 6% redevelopment. About 6% of the total drainage area out of those hundreds of acres was actually redeveloped, meaning new tear down homes. So that's about 6%. As you get up further north, that fourth basin, it was higher. It was in the teens. And as you go into different parts of town, the numbers get higher. That's just to frame the problem, not to give a excuse, but just to frame the problem. So one of the things that we're suggesting, and one of the things that we would like the task force to work on and to refine as we move forward, is rather than having the direct connections go to a storm sewer. Right now they're hardwired. They come out of the house, they go directly into the storm sewer, because the idea here was to eliminate the accumulation of water in the backyards. It's been described that could be could have exacerbated the flooding in the areas. One of the recommendations that we have suggested be looked at is rather than having that water go straight into the storm sewer, still have the developer put a storm sewer in. No, none of the developers want to put on storm sewers. Make sure this is not something that they're saying to the city staff. We want to put in these storm sewers. The city, because of the complaints they received back in the 90s, put in the storm sewers. But rather than having them discharged directly on into the storm sewer, have the opportunity for the water from the drains and from the sump pumps to infiltrate. Right now, anybody that had a sump pump working, and most of us don't have any sump pumps that are being activated right now, one of the benefits, I suppose, of a drought, a mini drought that we're in. Right now, any of the sump pump water would go right back into the ground, right? Everybody knows that. And during a flood event like we had in July, none of the sump pump water just being discharged onto the ground is being infiltrated. But one of the things that we suggested is, and this shows a rain garden type. And there's lots of rain gardens. There's as many houses as you have in Elmhurst. You could have a different rain garden. The idea here would be that the drains and the sump pump would you don't want to discharge right at the house, because those of you that have seen what happens, the water just discharges and goes right in the footing drain and you're recycling. So we're going to have to come up with standards with the city to get it away from the house, but allow it to discharge over land, have the opportunity for it to infiltrate into the soil, have it eventually flow into the rain garden type, a depressional storage. So rather than the quote, one of those quotes was, the city made my backyard a muddy area. The idea here is to have the water that's coming off of really from the dwelling unit itself, the roof drains, as well as the sump pumps, go into a rain garden, sit there, infiltrate, and still have a riser pipe that when the water gets to a certain level, rather than it flowing onto a neighbor's yard or flowing onto the street. These were problems that people expressed concerns about when you changed your policy. But to put these in, there's very qualified people in town that can recommend a site-by-site type rain garden. But this would allow, number one, it takes care of the issue of this discharge, takes care of it on the site, and it also gives people making sure that they have the awareness of where their storm water is going. Al showed you the exhibit that shows that there's still a number of homes in these flood-prone areas where footing drains, sump pumps are being discharged into the sanitary sewer. This allows people to see an outlet for it and hopefully eliminates. So this is one of our recommendations. This is simply a curve, and it doesn't surprise anybody that's ever watered, and I'm sure the representative of the Garden Club knows this very well, that as the rainfall or as the more water you put on a plant, it's not an infinite amount of water. Eventually, the water has there's no more water you can put. The soil gets saturated. Throughout the history of hydrology, people have been looking at it. This is just a curve that shows you when you have a substantial depth, the infiltration capacity of the soils gets diminished. What we're looking for in here with the rain gardens or storage areas on the properties is to somehow get the infiltration on the less frequent or the lower rainfall depths. This shows you a schematic on the profile as well as a plan view. We're not artists, so the idea here is to get that clear water away from the house and into the rain garden, flowing downhill into the rain garden and making sure that the water has the opportunity to infiltrate on its way there. Keeping it far enough away from the house that you're not recycling it. This would be something that would address the issue and, once again, more importantly, make people aware of where the water is going on their property. This is not the prettiest example, but these are some rain gardens that would come by a western suburb to capture water from a rooftop, divert it into these areas, let it be stored, and this has accommodates this runoff from this rooftop up to about a 1 or 2 year storm event. Let me just wrap up by telling you where we stand on our project. As I mentioned, the alternative analysis that I gave the preliminary assessment of today, we were about a month ahead of that, and we have started initiated other components of our study, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule. We'll be adjusting as we move forward. Once again, I wanted to get some preliminary results to the residents, many of whom I've seen at least a half dozen times at the various meetings.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. Very well done, very informative, and I'm sure many of the aldermen have written some questions down and may have some questions for you at this time. This report will also be on our website, posted on the website, so anybody can see this report by Dr. Burke and by the folks at RJN. So for all those watching, feel free to visit the website and make sure that you get a copy of that PowerPoint. Anybody with questions? I know I've made some notes, but Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few questions, but I'm just going to start with one, and I'll come back to the others. First, a comment, though. Going back to my Park District days, I noticed the picture you were using of York Commons is an old picture. Where the volleyball court was, there's now a tot lot. Does that change the ability to hold water there?
Certainly, under the various scenarios, the first scenario that we looked at, which was a gravity drain, it would be definitely impact with the pump evacuated option there. It's definitely going to impact the tot lot.
Okay. Pump evacuated reservoirs. Obviously, you go deeper, right? I mean,
yes.
So if we did that and we worked in conjunction with the school or the park and we did that, would the park, let's assume it's a park, would they still be able to use that space as a ball field, would they still be able to use that park for what it's being used for currently?
Most likely not. When you start getting to the depths, that's the reason why I had that table that talked about the depths for the pump evacuated reservoir. Just in order to utilize those sites, you're going to have to be, in some cases, 30 feet deep. It greatly impairs the usability because you no longer have some flat surfaces, you have side slopes. And so that's one of the reasons that, that's the reason why these are great questions, because these are considerations that need to be taken looked at carefully as we move forward, because when you start getting deeper and having the pump evacuated reservoirs, you start drastically impacting the usability of the sites.
Is the answer the same then for a gravity-fed detention area?
The gravity-fed would not be as deep, and in some cases we can use and keep it's not going to be one for one, whatever uses are there now in the future. But we can start working and looking at those uses and to see if we can replicate those and how many would be eliminated or impacted.
Thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Pezza.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess on page 9, and I'm not sure, Dr. Burke, if you would have this answer or city staff, the overhead sewer program, it was stated that there have been 128 complete to date. I'm just curious how many actually were installed since we voted in the program in the past year. Do we know that number? Maybe Mike Hughes?
Maybe Mike Hughes might know that. Michael?
Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think prior to this past summer, we'd only done 15 or 20 since the inception of the program, so roughly 148 or something like that.
Okay. Thank you. And then page 18, where the map was shown, but it was from 1988. I just have, I guess it's more of a suggestion than a question. I know our planning department has a very up-to-date map of the whole city, of what's been changed, all new development marked, new construction marked. I'm thinking that if we could do an overlap of that current map on this one, it may be very telling. It would show exactly what has changed and where it's changed, and maybe that could answer some questions for us as far as development and grading and things that have changed compared to 1988, since we don't have anything updated from that.
That's a good suggestion. As Dr. Burke indicated, the incidence of teardowns in this area is quite low, so we were just trying to cite an example at this stage in the project of the incidence of clear water sources. But in other areas, that's an absolutely good suggestion.
Okay. I think that was it for now. Thank you.
Very good, Alderman Brown.
Thank you. Two questions. First off, I appreciate all the alternatives and all the analysis that has gone in thus far. I do want to make a comment in the middle of my question here, and that is that I would like for the consultants to keep considering on what areas of what we came up with the comprehensive plan that we may not need to do as we continue down the analysis to make sure that we're watching our pennies throughout this process. With that said, sticking along the lines of watching our pennies, will either of you or both of you be providing a cost analysis of these alternatives? Because as the task force as well as the city council moves forward with this, it's all about that risk versus reward, et cetera, or cost effectiveness. So will that be included sometime in the near term?
Yes, that's part of our investigation. What we're doing, and hopefully as we move forward, we're getting great input, and hopefully start having a dialogue, city staff, with some of the owners of those green spaces to find out what the implications are for using those. Is it going to be given, I assume that there's intergovernmental cooperation, but I'll never take that for granted. Is it going to be a fee? And all those are going to come into play when we look at the cost for some of these storage facilities. I can give you the cost of excavating and putting pipes in and things like that, but if I'm replacing a tot lot at that site as an example, and I'm just using that as an example, those are things that we need to develop as we move forward here.
A follow-up to that, I mean, one example is gravity versus pumped, right?
Yes.
So that is definitely something that could be estimated. My second question is, there's been a theory pondered about since this happened over a year ago now, or approximately a year ago, that the overflow of the storm water was the major cause, or one of the significant causes, of the sanitary backup in the homes, otherwise I guess known as infiltration. From the current analysis where we are today, can we rule out that the stormwater overflow or the infiltration from the stormwater overflow was not a major concern or cause of the sanitary backup?
I don't think we're at this point in our investigation we're able to make general statements like that. That may vary from area to area, but right now I don't think we're in a situation where we can make a general statement that the stormwater was the cause or was never the cause of the sanitary sewer backup.
Do you know at what point of our comprehensive plan that would be readily available?
I assume within the next 2 months as we move forward to finalizing some of these alternatives, doing what you suggested on the costs, and taking a look at the contributions, try to narrow down the causes.
Would that be possible to get done at the point of after the smoke testing?
Possibly. So we won't know until we're done with the smoke test. That's a good point. We won't know until we quantify the extent of those cross connections or direct connections that are realized with the smoke testing.
Thank you.
Alderman Gudenkauf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that so much of the alternative storage is really predicated on the availability of these open spaces and whether or not they can be completely converted to some sort of retention or detention offsets. Is it a viable option to create underground storage as an alternative in our area, that thereby creating Millennium Park type above ground park spaces?
You certainly can put underground detention. It's usually about 4 or 5, sometimes more expensive, because if you can envision, if you were putting it, let's say, under the streets, and I don't know if that was your idea, but I mean, we've seen it, we've put it where we have no open space under the streets. What you would do is put a very large box culvert in, but imagine the cost, because number one, you're digging the hole, And rather than leaving it open like you are on these reservoirs that I'm talking about, you are then putting a basement and a house and a roof over it, and that's very expensive. That can get up as high as $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 an acre foot. So those are very expensive. We can put it underground in a park, as an example. You can put it in stone. People are going to ask, and I might as well address it. If you put it in stone, right? A stone. Everybody that goes to McDonald's or another fast food restaurant and says no ice in my drink is saying that. Why? Because you can get the most drink in a glass without ice. If you're inducing ice or rock that you would have to, but all of a sudden you are putting a lot less water in there. So you would have to have, for the same volume of storage, to meet the same volume of storage for large diameter rock, you're going to have to go 3 times as deep. So, and it's expensive because you're digging the hole, you're taking the dirt out, and you're putting rock on top of it, then you're putting some playing surface on. And so you can absolutely do it, and there's been applications, but on isolated type sites that don't have any other alternatives.
Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Second question. On several of the slides where you talked about a third level of protection, you talked about off-site compensatory storage. I heard you say at the time that if we do that, that off-site storage would have to be adjacent to Salt Creek if we're putting more water in at Harrison or one of those. Do we have those sites in Elmhurst, or are you saying we'd have to go down to Oak Brook and work with them to find some off-site compensatory storage adjacent to the creek downriver?
There may be some opportunity at the storage that has been allocated by Eldridge Park, but not enough to offset all of the impacts of the additional pumping. So we would have to go to a location such as the one in Oak Brook, as an example. There's open space along the creek. To give you an example, when Addison put in a pump station long ago, they took out the site of the old Louis Reservoir at Lake and Villa, old Louis Restaurant. There's a Louis Restaurant at Lake and Villa. They tore that down and excavated out that area so the water comes under Lake Street into the site and then out. So that's an example of a compensatory storage facility that's on the channel or adjacent to the channel.
So realistically, and this just what I've seen tonight and just listening to your answer, that seems like it'd be a tough ask. It seems like that'd be hard to get to be able to, for us to pump more water into the creek, considering that we don't have areas for the off-site compensatory, for us going to Oak Brook or further downstream and saying, hey, you want to work with us? Am I misreading that, or am I directionally correct?
You're directionally correct.
Thank you.
Alderman Mulliner?
Yeah, thank you for coming in this evening and giving us this update. First off, you've given us a lot of information, and we've just gotten it. My concern is that I know we're going to have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions. I haven't had time to really formulate them because we've seen this information this evening. I'd like to know whether we're going to have an opportunity for you to come back and for us to ask a series of questions, because I know that as all of us get a chance to go through this, we're going to have questions for you. And I'd like to get an opportunity to really go through this in much more detail and have that opportunity to come back and talk to you with a lot more detail, a lot more questions. That's my first question. And I have another question that relates to the task force. So will we have an opportunity to discuss this with you further?
Yes. I don't know if we've finalized the date for the next meeting or not, but we'll be working with Mr. Hughes to establish the next date.
And I'd like it not to be pushed too far back, because I really would like to continue to delve into this. I've heard a lot of different options. I've heard suggestions that relate to public. I've heard suggestions that relate to private. And I guess what I want to do is I want to make sure that we're covering every possible base. And one of the concerns that I have is that we now have a task force that now, once again, for the first time ever, has seen this report and now has a great deal of data to kind of review and to look over. I'm hoping that as we work with the task force, that we listen to those task force members
as far as other alternatives, because I know that there's been I've gotten a lot of phone calls from people who have said, you know, what about this, what about that? A number of those ideas we've floated past you as well already, but a number of those ideas I haven't seen in any of these reports. And I think we need to make sure that as we're looking into these options that we have available to us, that we incorporate those that the task force have come up with as well, because I know they've been talking among themselves before even having these opportunities to see what you're coming up with, because people have been kind of waiting for this to occur. You know, I just a couple of questions that I have, kind of that I'm thinking a little bit about. You know, we talked a lot, you talked at the latter part of it about the sump pumps, and the sump pumps being now connected into the storm sewers. That also includes in the new houses the downspouts. And yes, I do recall it during the 80s and 90s, actually the 90s, when everybody was complaining, and now this is dumping it on my leg yard and it's getting muddy and all of that type of stuff. Those are questions that really need to be addressed as to how much water is actually being put into that, into the storm sewers from that, and where would that water go after if it didn't go in there. As I looked at some of these things when you were talking about the sump pump disconnect, and kind of between the two of you, as I heard you talk about the sump pump disconnect, I looked at the models that you had. And from my recollection, when we did the sump pump disconnect, most of the homes are being looked at as they're being sold to make sure that that disconnect has occurred. I'm concerned, once again, I think going back to a little bit to Alderman Pez's question about how accurate that map is from the 80s, because I know a great number of these houses have already done those separations. As an example, what I saw was the wash tub coming out of it and going into the sump pump. Most of the homeowners have separated that, or should have separated that by now. Those are very inexpensive fixes to get some of this water out of the different locations and into the right locations. But we need to, and I know that's part of the smoke testing, but I think that some of that stuff's been done, and I'm concerned that I want to make sure that we make sure we've got accurate data when we're looking at all of this. Then probably my most important question, as far as I'm concerned at this point, is I want to make sure that the models that we're dealing with are accurate. And the reason that I bring this up is because, Dr. Burke, you know this better than anybody. DuPage County's been using a model. They came up with the model. They told us how much flooding would occur to redevelop the FEMA map. We did some research on it. They gave us a map that showed us that the water was going to be in certain areas. We had a flood. We didn't really have a flood. We had a rain that was equivalent of what they were saying the model was going to flood our town, and it didn't flood our town. So I want to make sure that the models that are being developed are accurate models that are going to actually show what's really going to occur if we make any of these changes, and that we're not going to be doing the same thing that we were doing with DuPage County. Mr. Borchard spent a great deal of time working with DuPage County to make sure that those maps were accurate, because we wanted to make sure that the FEMA maps were correct. And if we have the wrong models that we're working with, this could be a real problem.
And I can, since you're sitting there, that's answered by the first point here, to calibrate it, to make sure. And I mentioned earlier, the staff is working to get high water marks so that the areas that we simulated with this computer model are accurate. So we, as I said earlier, we are going to be refining the model based on the 2010. And I guess if I had read this whole, I'd eliminate some of the other questions regarding the looking at the developed cost estimates to answer your question. So if I had gone through this last slide, I would have eliminated some questions. But yes, that's part of the investigation, calibrate the model.
Alderman Levin.
If Alderman Mulner's through floating ideas. The question I have is something you haven't addressed exactly, and I'm not sure if it's something you can answer, but in the year or so since this flooding issue has arisen, there's been discussion about new homes being built and the amount of land that's being built upon and what the effect would be on what might be a larger home. And I wonder if you could comment if your study so far has given you any indication of the magnitude of the effect of a larger home on the same size lot.
Okay. Yes, that's one of the tasks. If you recall, I gave some presentation on that last time. We included some additional homes. We took 3 additional homes and included those in our set. We will present those at the next meeting, the results. But the other thing that I we will do is to quantify how much additional runoff is being generated by each of those houses. It's easy to say that the house before was 3,500 square feet, and in the future it was 4,500 square feet, whatever the numbers come out to be. But the issue also is, did the basement it was a deeper basement, because a deeper basement results in more sump pumps, right? The sump pumps, because there's more groundwater. So we're going to quantify those and come back to you with specific numbers, specific calculations on increased volumes as well as peak flow rates. There's two components, volumes and flow rates. Both have an impact, or can have an impact, on the surrounding properties.
Thank you. Alderman Palumski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming and for the information you presented today. I have a couple questions about how you measure the options. For example, Pine Street has 52 homes affected, and the southwest corner has 191 homes affected. And you did allude to this in how you're going to measure the costs, that the options are measured in how the service would be delivered, how it's going to be pumped, not how many homes would be affected with the 2-year protection or the 100-year protection. Do you have that information?
We are going to be generating, and that's one of the last items there. When we determine the cost estimates of these improvements, I want to make sure there's a capital cost. How much it's going to cost you to dig out the hole, put the storm sewers, put grass seed in them, and simplifying it, and those are the capital costs. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, the operation and maintenance costs, the cost of pumping. Those are the things. The cost of maintaining the pumps, things like that. All those will go into a cost for each of the selected alternatives that we present to you. And each one of those alternatives will have a corresponding number of homes that are going to be protected, so that you can assign it to those homes. So you can make, Alderman here will make a decision based on various options, the number of homes, dollars per number of homes protected. That's the type of information I'm going to give you, rather than looking at a traditional benefit cost analysis, because all the benefit cost analysis that I'm going to do is going to show that it's going to be less than 1, which doesn't give you any real good indicator. So we will give you number of homes protected for the dollars.
Thank you.
Very good. Alderman York. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I have a question real quick. Actually, Alderman Wader, you had a hand up too?
I did.
Go ahead.
I can defer to the mayor.
Do we know approximately how many of the homes that are currently still in the combined system that was originally built for the community, that was prior to 1968? Do we have an idea of how many homes still are in that combined system, Doctor?
Well, when you say combined sewer, I think you're referring to the fact that some of them had the footing drains connected directly, that were done, that were homes that were constructed before 1968 that had the footing drains directly connected. And I think we do have some, we do have, there's a good number of homes, and as you recall, there was a conscious decision by the board not to require, when the sewer was decombined from a combined sewer to a sanitary and storm sewer system. That was a conscious decision not to do it. And we have those numbers. I think in our previous discussion, we had the map that the city staff has worked on and prepared. I just don't have, we could dig it out and I can show it to you later on. Okay. But we do have a number.
Very good. Okay. Alderman Wager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks again, Mr. Burke. I noticed in some of the alternatives you didn't have Eldridge Park, which is a large park on the southwest part of the town, as any of the alternatives. Is it because it hasn't been looked at yet, or it's just not a good alternative?
No, Eldridge Park, I believe that we came to the conclusion when we looked at it that the storage capabilities have been maximized. The available storage vis-a-vis the challenged waste, let's just use that, challenged waste or groundwater. I think the storage is available. However, it's important, as you recall, and I mentioned in some of the earlier meetings, there is a amount of storage that has been allocated for the discretion of the city of Elmhurst. And so we will be looking at whether that volume and comparing it to some of the alternatives, including the increased pumping stations, to see if they're in the same order of magnitude.
Along with the pond that's across the river? Or the,
Yeah, the pond across the river is what has the additional allocated
Okay, that's
storage.
what you're talking
We think we came to the conclusion Eldridge Park itself did not have any capacity for additional storage.
thank you.
Alderman Pezza, and then I'll go Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Along the line of alternatives, it appears that the most common sense and cost-effective alternatives would be to use these public areas. My question is, were any private areas looked at or discussed as far as perhaps a couple of private parcels amongst these areas be purchased and utilized in this fashion at all?
We looked at vacant lot, the large vacant lots, so I don't know if those are public or private. I think those are private. So to answer your question, we have looked at anything that was sizable and looked like it was not developed, and we looked at those areas. So we looked at both private and public.
What about homes that are already existing that perhaps are vacant in these areas or flood excessively or have the reverse driveways, just as other alternatives? Has that been looked at all?
We have not looked at buyouts at this point. We're not asked to look at buyouts. I didn't want to, we did not include the buyout option. Certainly that is always an option, and that would be a consideration for you when we start looking at number of homes, dollars to protect the last increment of homes. That would be something that you could look at, and certainly we want to we want to have confidence or confidentiality in some of these discussions relative to buyouts.
Thank you.
Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 25, under Storm Events, an Analyze slide, you lay out here the definitions of the various storm events, 100-year, 10, 5, and 2. On the second bullet item, or the first sub-bullet item, it stated that storm sewers are typically designed to convey the peak 10-year flow to meet ordinances. Is that present day? And if it is present day, then I would ask if you can provide some background on why on page 35 we would propose alternatives that could potentially support 100-year events or anything above a 10-year event.
Good question. 10-year is the standard for design for storm sewer systems. However, as I suggested, storm sewer systems are only one component. Right now, when we have events greater than a 10-year, in modern design, when it gets greater than 10-year, it flows downhill to a safe location. In the case of the study areas that I talked about here, it flows downhill to a sag point, builds up, and starts flooding. So because of that, remember that exhibit that showed the 2, 5, 10, the different levels of protection? In this particular case, providing a 10-year level of protection would still leave hundreds of homes subject to flooding within the city of Elmhurst. So that's the reason why we looked at providing something beyond the 10-year level protection.
Thank you. And just, I guess, a comment or a recommendation. I know that the Park District has done a very good job every year to remodel various parks around Elmhurst. I think maybe to our city staff to whisper in their ear as they continue to do their remodels to potentially remodel to the extent of adding additional stormwater storage throughout all of the city of Elmhurst, even in the areas that we're not seeing it today, just in case we see this problem increase over time. Thank you.
Chairman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to answer what Alderman Bram pointed out, we have not only whispered in their ear, I'm looking at Alderman Mulliner, we have screamed in their ears, along with District 205, to tell them that these are potential solutions that may be coming forward and that we're going to be looking to work with them to address this. So they already have heard it at least 3 times from us directly. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Chairman Kennedy and Alderman Mulliner are on the Park City School Committee, which we put together. I put together along with the council to make sure that intergovernmental things like this nature, whether it's stormwater, whether it's parking, whatever the issues might be, that we share resources and try to help each other out. And in tough times, we need to do that. So, Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and this is my last comment or question on this report. First of all, and this is a comment, first of all, this is a lot, and this, I'll be honest, this is a lot more than I expected to get tonight, so thank you for, pushing the timeline up, and really this is, I'm excited is the wrong word, but this is a lot more than I expected to get. But one thing is, and I think we've all thought this, I know I have, and this just reinforces it. This information shows us that the problem isn't what to do with the water. The problem is, how do we stop the water from getting into the system? And because the bottom line is, when Mother Nature wants to win, she's going to win. And when I look at some of these levels of protection, and two of them jumped out to me right away, Villette and Swain, by even going to the second alternative, which was even greater than the first, and knowing now that the third may or may not be feasible, to only say that that's a 5-year level of protection, that's scary. Washington Street, and I know there's several residents of Washington here, the second alternative is a 25-year level of protection. That's scary. That no matter, I don't want to say no matter what we do, but we could do a lot of stuff and then tell residents, well, we're at 5 years or we're at 25 years, knowing that in the last 2+ years we've had 300-year+ events. And I know it's coming up in Task 7, but I think Task 7 might be the most important of all the tasks, and that is, what are we going to do moving forward? How do we keep water from the system? And that's what I'm really interested in getting. That's what I'm interested in hearing from the experts. What does disconnecting the gutters get us? What does putting in rain guards get us? Or, excuse me, rain gardens? What does putting in permeable pavers, whether it's in individual house driveways or somebody mentioned in comments tonight about, parking lots? I want to know what that gets us, because it's becoming clearer and clearer. We need to work hard at keeping the water out, not just managing it once it's in. Thank you.
Alderman Wagner?
Dr. Burke, I don't see it on the last slide here, and I'm just curious if you could also add in a time element to the cost factor. This is an awful lot of work all at once, and we've seen a couple roads being repaved in town, and things happen. So I don't know if it's part of, I didn't see it in here, but if you could add that in the next one or the final presentation, that'd be great. Thank you.
Will do.
Very good. Alderman Morley.
Real quick question, kind of a follow-up to a couple of previous questions. I'm assuming maybe it's topographically or geographically not the right place, but I didn't see Butterfield Park on any of those, and we actually do have some flooding issues there. I'm just curious if it made any sense to stop some of that water uphill and retain it, and what you found.
That's a good question, because it is open space. Luke just pointed out that it's too high. It's too high, and we can excavate it, but you're excavating out a great deal of height and not getting any benefit from it. So if that makes sense. You're just clearing it out to get it to a point that you can start excavating. So that was the reason why we didn't look at that.
Thank you.
I just have one last question. I got a bunch more, but I'm going to save those for the task force. You mentioned, Dr. Burke, in 1992 that the DuPage County passed a stormwater ordinance. Prior to that, what ordinance did they have in place for development? So
different municipalities had different ordinances with different requirements, different ratios for compensatory storage and the like, and different standards for design. So it was across the board.
It was really up to the towns then?
It was up to the individual towns. It was after the 87 and 86 flood events when there was a push to have a uniform stormwater management ordinance.
And what level did the new ordinance in 1992 push the level of improvement up to?
Well, for flood control projects, the county has pursued for flood control projects a 100-year level protection for identification of at least seeing what can be done to solve the flooding problems.
Gotcha. So they guarantee redevelopment's got to be at least in a 100-year.
Well, yes, certainly for all the overland flow routes, you have a 100-year overland flow route.
Right.
You have freeboard, which is above the elevation of the flood level to get it above what we predict. Just because our elevations that we predict, we would suggest that one of our other tasks is to make sure that any new development is above that by a certain amount. So we're not putting a house right at that flood level, but having an additional level protection.
Gotcha. I often hear a number, because I'm on Stormwater Commission for the county, any new development has got to be a 50% better, 1.5, it's the magic number that I often hear at our meetings. So that would mean that basically any new development, new improvement, whether it's the hospital or new development that might go up, would actually almost increase the flood capacity almost 50% in that area. In other words, there's that much more retention given to that area. Is that correct?
For floodplain areas, yes. There's 150% compensatory storage requirement.
Very good.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to follow up with, prior to the 1992 ordinance, the city followed the Water Reclamation District's policy on stormwater detention, and effectively what it did is we had a process where you brought in your site, we took a certain storms, we called it grass, it's got a certain pitch to it, we put a storm on it, X amount of water runs off. Now you're going to pave half of it with your building and your parking lot. We take that now impervious area, we put the same storm on it, we see how much runs off, and you had to detain for the difference. So prior to 1992, you couldn't take a grass field, pave it, and run off more water. You had to get it back to grass. But you're correct, they did increase how much you actually, or how much less you could run off in the current ordinance since 1992.
So the county ordinance is actually tougher than what we used to have?
Yes.
Okay, just want to clarify. Thank you. Alderman York.
Just one thing, thanks for a lot of information. A lot of aldermen have noted that we've got a big stack here, and we appreciate you putting it together. I think just observation, a lot of information here, but there's still 5 areas that we haven't even looked at and detailed, and I think everybody needs to keep that in the back of their mind as well. We've hit on some areas. Obviously, Pine Street, as a 4th Ward Alderman, I like to see that that's detailed, but there's a lot of areas that haven't been hit on too. So I think this is the tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
Good point. I mentioned I was only going to use 5 of the study areas. We're substantially complete with the investigation of the other 5, and are developing and have developed alternatives for those areas as well.
And I can understand your concern that you voiced earlier about, are you shooting yourself in the foot by disclosing only 5 areas
or giving information out as we're vetting it and calibrating the models and doing things like that. But it was important, I thought, to get this material
and I
out.
appreciate it. I understand the risk, and I'm glad you took it. Thank you.
Very good. Alderman Gutenkauf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Work, I just have a very quick clarification question. I'm not sure I understood what you said in response to the mayor's comment about increasing flood storage capacity by 50%. Did you say that only applied in floodplains?
That's right. Compensatory storage in the ordinance applies to floodplain impacts, fill in the floodplain. And it can also be incremental as well as the surcharge of 50%.
So if new development occurs in a property that isn't in the floodplain, it isn't quite that above level of protection?
What I showed through that table earlier, on that table that I had when I compared the volume of storage, you can see that the volume of storage for any development of substantial size is fairly significant, up to 0.35 acre-feet of storage per acre.
Michael?
Thanks, Mayor. And maybe to clarify that we're going back between compensatory storage and detention. The county ordinance, the 1992 ordinance, requires in the floodplain compensatory storage at 1.5 to 1. If you fill a cubic yard in the floodplain, you got to take a 1.5 yards out somewhere else. On the detention side, the city's old policy was you basically couldn't run off at a faster rate than grass. The county's policy is much more restrictive, and you have to run off at less than the rate of grass, far less.
That's why I thought that was important to people understand that. Okay, very good. The task force is going to go ahead and break off, and I know it's getting late. I would encourage those questions be formulated in the task force and the subcommittees. And Dr. Burke will be here for the remainder of the evening to answer questions. Many of his staff members are here as well too. Everybody's going to get their chance to ask questions tonight. Being that we ran late, we still have a meeting to finish up on here. So I would encourage the Stormwater Committee to and Dr. Burke and his team to go ahead and break off and meet privately. People from the public are welcome to go into those meetings. We've got nothing to hide. but we will finish up our meeting here for the council and go ahead and move on. There will be subsequent meetings for the Stormwater Committee, as well as workshops. So there'll be a lot more to come, and we appreciate everybody's patience and help. I would ask, if at all possible, if out of tonight's task force, if we could elect a chairman and a vice chairman, if there are any leaders that are willing to step up and take those roles on, that would be helpful. And this will hopefully lead to have some leadership and help in putting that final report together for our recommendations to the council. So if we could elect a chairman and a vice chairman of the task force, that'd be great. Or consider who those people might be. Thank you.
I think Mike got the message. I'm not sure anybody else heard. Exactly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not based on what I said.
That's why my wife used to say that was a lot of data.
Yeah, we're not there yet. We're on the other side.
I know. I'm hoping.
They don't even have backup.
You're high or something.
100-year-old house and
So much.
windows, no insulation.
And that's nice. They got plaster walls.
Can't even
I know. Same thing.
Yeah, yeah. I maybe mentioned it. You didn't hear that? No. All right, well, preliminary. Keep your ears open. What?
Get the meeting done so we can go out to those meetings.
January, February,
No, I don't think they are either. That's why I'd like to start meeting done.
Oh, my God.
Not too much. Too much. Right about no power.
I feel 80% of your pain. What have got a front?
No problem at all. All right, let's check. Especially not your voice.
We have got.
You kidding me?
Signs with 3.
Okay.
It ain't easy. We pretty much do this.
As the room clears and the task force moves into the conference rooms, we'll go ahead and go on to the rest of the meeting here. Our next item on the agenda is our consent agenda, item number 6. This time, is there anybody who has a question or might want to vote no on any particular item on the consent agenda? Please indicate that at this time. Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda in its entirety. Alderman York with a motion. Alderman Morley with a second. Clerk Spencer, if you could please call the roll.
York.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Wagner.
Aye.
Clerk Spencer, if you could a little louder if you could. Sorry.
I can do that. Mulliner.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Gudenkauf.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Dunn, absent. Bram.
Aye.
Polumsky.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Levin.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 absent.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 absent. The consent agenda passes in its entirety. I will go on to item number 7, which is a committee report. Clerk Spencer, if you'll please read the recommendation, please.
It is therefore the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the City Council support the approval of an amended conditional use permit as outlined herein. The City Attorney is hereby directed to prepare the necessary documents for City Council approval. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee. Signed by Stephen Morley, Chairman, Danny Polumsky, Vice Chair, Norman Leader, Alderman of the Second Ward.
Thank you, Clerk Spencer. Before I ask for a motion in a second to put this particular report on the on the floor. I just like to make a comment that I want to thank Darrell Whistler, our chairman of our zoning commission, all the commissioners, District 205, and for the committee that was made up of both 205 representatives and residents. We have an agreed-upon report and recommendation tonight that I think is terrific. It's going to utilize this field, which was rebuilt by the community out of private donations, to be utilized many, many times, and a lot more than the previous ordinance allowed us to. So let the kids have fun and play ball and all the different events, soccer and football, and all the new sports that we've got coming out as well, lacrosse. So thank you for all their hard work from the private side, from the commission, and from our committee. With that, I'd ask for a motion in a second to put this on the floor. Mr. Chairman Morley with a motion. Second by Alderman Palumski. Discussion. Chairman Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will do the best I can to summarize a year's worth of meetings at 10 o'clock at night. The good news is that the outcome, as the mayor alluded to, is a good one. Ultimately, this is a request for an amended conditional use from the school district that was originally put in place in 1986. And it's an amended conditional use application for the use of lighting fixtures and the public address system. As I stated, this was put together originally. The ordinance for amended or for conditional use was in 1986. And long story short, is it basically allowed for 12 nights of use. Flash forward 20 some odd years, 30 years, and District 205, York High School, puts in basically an all-season field. In addition, the amount of boys and girls sports exponentially grows at that time, and basically the facility itself has outgrown the ordinance. So as a result, and I'll try to summarize a little bit of the timeline, this started way back when, August 4th, and stumbled a little bit out of the blocks, quite frankly, but there was an application made starting August 4th, and subsequently there was 2 additional amendments to this application. Ultimately 3 applications, or 1 application and 2 amendments to what exactly the applicant was looking for. Initially, the application was put forward with limited input from the community itself. Ultimately, a commission was formed, a council, I should say, the York Community Advisory Council, or as they refer to themselves as YCAC, was formed, and it was a group of citizens. And the best way I can put it is, I was talking to one of the members of this Community Advisory Council, and one of the gentlemen on the committee said, well, or on the council said, you know, I went to the first meeting with the intent of telling everybody that it's crazy that there should be any restriction of use on this, and I can't believe there's these anti-light people out there. And he said he didn't even get through half of the meeting. And he said, wow, there's more here than I thought, and these people who have concerns have real concerns. And he went from what you would call a pro-light person to someone who had concerns about how this was going to be moving forward. Also, I would add that when asked personally, both community members of the community, and also fellow aldermen, they asked me, well, who's on this York Community Advisory Council? Certainly one person to point out would be the applicant. District 205 was part of that. But the concern or question was asked of me, are these anti-light people or pro-light people? And ultimately what I would say is it's neither. These people are 100% solution committed folks, and they're to be commended to that. And I want to read what I would consider kind of their mission statement, if you will, this YCAC. We mutually seek the following: maximize the opportunities for the use of Clarence D. East Field, minimize the impact of the quality of life for the surrounding neighbors, strengthen communications between and among all parties, and celebrate our relationship and community. And I think that says a lot. And that's this commission And that's part of the reason why this application went through multiple forms, was because of this YCAC, York Community Advisory Council. So we started August 4th, 2010. There was several public hearings. There was at least 3 meetings at the commission. A couple of them were postponed, a couple of them were missed. There was 3 separate deliberations from the commission, and I would also like to thank Darrell Whistler and his commission for all the hard work they did. Ultimately, it came to our committee for review. At our first committee, there was representatives of this YCAC group there, and they presented us with an interesting proposal. That was that we take the consideration that was for the most part supported by this group. We take the recommendation from the commission and allow it to be in place for 1 year, and only 1 year, and then we take a second look at that. And the reason why is that there's so many, there's a pretty large change from 12 nights to the amount of nights and dates that are being allowed. And really, the YCAC group came together and said, well, we want this to work, but what we don't want to do is commit to something and we find out a year later that it doesn't work. So their recommendation, which we support, is to do 1 year of data gathering and then come back. And that's why there's, if you will, a sunset clause. We work with the city attorney. There's actually a sunset clause in our recommendation for this amended conditional use. In addition, so we basically took the recommendation from the commission. We changed 2 parts to it. One was really a little bit of housekeeping. We moved up the spring start date to March 1st to better coincide with actually the start of the spring sports. It was March 15th. We moved it up 2 weeks to coincide with the sports. The second thing that we did was we allowed for an earlier start date. An earlier turn-on time for the lights in the morning from 7 a.m. to 5:30. And the reason why we did that is that, and this is another thing that should be pointed out as what a community can do when it comes together, is it was identified during the commission meetings, during the several commission meetings, that one of the things that would help the neighbors around was if the lighting was improved. The lighting that was put in 1986 and then revised a little bit later certainly was not up to speed in terms of technology, and there's a way you could either dome that or basically reduce what they call spillover of that lighting. And at the time, it was identified that between $100,000 and $150,000 worth of improvements were needed. And if that were to be addressed, then that's something that you could consider turning on the lights a little bit earlier. Well, an anonymous benefactor actually stepped forward and put $150,000 in the bank. Not agreed to pay $150,000, actually wrote the check and put the money in the account. All they asked is the YCAT group to do your best to do fundraising to try to reduce that amount, but they actually wrote the check and put it in the bank. To date, there's actually been approximately $100,000 of that raised, so it's just a good example of the community coming together. To summarize, basically what the commission recommended and what the committee is recommending is that we put the changes detailed in the report, and there's very specific changes, very specific guidelines, and it's one of the things that was tightened up between the second and third alteration. Very specific timelines of when lighting is allowed Monday through Thursday, and then also on the weekends, and there's very specific times when the public address system is to be used. The committee's in agreement with that. What we're asking and what this report is recommending and supporting is that this ordinance be put in place with a sunset clause of 18 months. And one of the reasons why, when working with the city staff, I wanted to put this report on, not on the consent agenda, but in discussion, was to reiterate the commitment that the committee has, and that is that we wanted 1 year's worth of data, and we want, and then the applicant, 205, has to come to us along with YCAC and say what worked, what didn't work, et cetera. We're giving ourselves the outside timeline of an extra 6 months after that year wraps up. But it's the commitment of the committee to meet as soon as that data is available, review what the impact is, 1 year worth of data, and and then either, officially put this ordinance in without a sunset clause, or if need be, make any changes. So long and the short of it is, between the commission and the YCAC group, they took a situation that, like I said, was a little stumbled a little bit coming out of the blocks, and they turned it into a 100% success. It really made our jobs as committee members easy, and my hat is off to the YCAC group and really the citizens of Elmhurst for making our job easy. And I encourage everyone to support the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Anybody else for discussion? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll be brief at 10:20 at night. This issue, when it first bubbled up some time ago, was as volatile as any issue that I've had while I've been on the council, not related to ComEd or stormwater. I heard from so many different people on both sides of the issue, and it was divisive within the community. And I don't have anything to add to what Chairman Morley or Mayor DeCiani said, other than to say, to give my thanks to Chairman Whistler in Zoning and Planning and the YCAC, because their hard work, their diligence, their patience did bring this from as divisive an issue as I've seen to one where, neighbors who were vehemently against the lights got up at a 205 meeting and urged the school board to do the deal because they were on board. I think ultimately the neighbors want to have the trust. I think the boosters want the ordinance to go away, and I think that's feasible if everything that happens that has been pledged to happen happens, and I think that's feasible. But really, it's hard to underestimate how important their work was, because I promise you, if they didn't do that work, if the Zoning and Planning and YCAC didn't do that, this chamber would still be filled with 150 people tonight. And the fact that there's one resident that's been very involved with the issue still here, I think speaks volume to the work they've done. So I fully support it, and I thank the committee, Zoning and Planning, and YCAC for their efforts.
Thanks, Alderman. Alderman Levin.
Well, I think also Mr. Ruprecht, who's here tonight, and Dave Kleinhand's work to put together with the anonymous benefactor the package that creates the lighting, which allowed the extended use to go into play. So that's just another component of a couple of people showing some leadership in the community to make this happen. It affects the 5th Ward and the 1st Ward. I think all the aldermen would share Alderman Healy's viewpoint that it's one of those issues where you receive a lot of calls, and it was so pleasant to know that there was a mediated solution that didn't force us to choose sides between two groups that really had an interest that needed protected. So I wanted to throw in that thanks also.
Thanks, Alderman Levin. Alderman Morley.
Quick follow-up. Wanted to mention that new Superintendent David Pernot actually attended our last meeting and fully supported what was listed in this. And then another nod to YCAC. When I contacted the group and tried to get a full list of members to acknowledge them personally, they said, that's not necessary, we don't want to miss anybody, it was a group effort, and just we hope you'll support what we put forward. So
great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anybody else? Oh, Alderman Plumsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank DPZ, and especially the fact that I just came in at the tail end of this. I really appreciate the work that went into this, and to the Planning and Zoning Commission, Mr. Whistler, for your work and everyone's attention and effort with this. This was especially easy for me, but I appreciate all the work, and I think it's a great solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Polomsky. We appreciate it. Anybody else? Questions, discussion? All right. Yeah. Hearing none, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please. Actually, we can do this by voice vote. It's a report, so. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? I didn't think so. All right. Report passes. On to reports and recommendations of appointing elected officials. My report, I've got a couple of items I'd like to mention. Actually, last week, the Western Access, I have it right here, the Elgin O'Hare Western Bypass Advisory Council report to the governor was presented, and actually copies of this went out to all the aldermen, so all the aldermen actually have this report. And the governor did a great job, along with Chairman Cronin from DuPage County, former senator here from Elmhurst, over in the village of Bensonville. We actually had a big press conference, and I haven't ever seen, I keep on saying this, I've never seen this more united, and now we've got more and more high-ranking officials from the county, from the state, the governor included, said this will be built. Actually, they had one of the last hearings today out at DuPage County. I went and spoke on behalf of Elmhurst, and many of the mayors showed up. That this project definitely needs to happen. This project will actually bring roughly 2,000 jobs, 1,600 to 2,000 jobs to Elmhurst. To put that in perspective, it'd be the second largest employment producer next to our hospital. That's how important it is for Elmhurst. I did push the fact that, and actually Chairman Cronin, to his credit, said, we can do the 2.2. That's scaled down, and it'll be better than nothing. But the best thing to do is the 3.6. That'll give us ramps at Grand Avenue. That will hopefully help a ton of economic development opportunities to the north. But again, it's going to all be about funding. So Tollway will be the lead on this, and actually we're getting them primed to take this and move on. Hopefully, Christy LaFleur, who's the executive director of the Tollway, and their team will be moving forward. So I will keep you apprised, but that was a big hurdle. And again, this has been 25 years in the works. And talking to my close friends at the Tollway, they're telling me it's this close from happening. In other words, before we were miles away. And Alderman Morley, Chairman Morley asked me one time, "Is this ever going to happen?" And I said, "Steve, I think we're close." So hopefully this works out. We actually had the governor out here last week for a bill signing. James's Law was signed into law, and several of the Alderman Hipskin, Alderman Pezza was there, Alderman Chairman Wagner, and we witnessed that. Who was a boy, James O'Brien, who was lost, a child with autism, back 7 years old. At the time, was lost for hours, and we had all police and fire, even public works people looking for this young boy. And fortunately, we found him unharmed. But this technology will allow people with autism, people with Alzheimer's, senior citizens, dementia, anybody that's got a cognitive impairment to be tracked and by their loved ones. So prior to that law, it was impossible to do that. So I thank the governor for coming out. I thank Chief Milner, who is a senator now, that actually carried that bill in the Senate for us, and also Karen May, who was a state representative from Highland Park, who's the chair of the Telecommunications Committee, who carried that for us. So it was a bipartisan bill. We had Patty Bellock here, we had Chris Nybo, we had Dennis Rebelletti. Literally every legislator from both DuPage and Cook were very, very proactive in getting this bipartisan bill passed. So the storms that hit us last week were another record event for ComEd, and for was difficult on us. Although last time, 3 weeks ago, we had about 17 out of 18,000 homes without power. This time we had around 4,500 homes without power. But if you were one of those 4,500, which I was for a while, and my mother was for around 3 to 4 days, you were very, very frustrated. So we'll be working with ComEd. In these situations, when you've got trees down and you've got massive outages, they had almost 1 million people without power in the region last week. And actually prior to that, two and a half, 3 weeks ago, they had around 500,000. But Elmhurst was hit worse in the event 2.5, 3 weeks ago than we were hit last week. But the magnitude of these storms are getting worse and worse. That's why we're here, for dealing with issues like we are dealing with Dr. Burke. We're going to keep on ComEd as far as equipment upgrades. Unfortunately, with these events, when you've got above-ground power, trees are going to come down, and I don't care what kind of equipment we got, stuff is going to be out of power. So, but our still push is to push ComEd to upgrade equipment. Actually, I had a vice president in here who met with our new city manager that actually admitted that we need a 12K system. And I was like, finally, I got a guy that agrees, So we're going to be pushing for an upgrade. We also trying to get a cost estimate on what it would cost to bury. They're telling me $500 million to bury power in Elmhurst. So, towns like Naperville that were farmland, those towns are much easier to deal with. So we're going to look at every option. We've got a subcommittee on the task force strictly geared for ComEd, and we will have ComEd out here as well. So we're going to keep on pressing ComEd and deal with both power and stormwater. So That's it from me. Anybody else with any reports? Alderman Pezza.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to be sure we also thank Chief Neubauer for his help, very instrumental in getting that locator system. I know our committee talked about it, and he was very instrumental, so thank you also for your help.
Thank you, and actually, well said. Actually, when the individual came to me and told me what the problem was, I went right to the chief. He researched every option that was out there, and this was the best, and it was the least expensive. And that's what we're looking for, because oftentimes these families are, financially challenged because we're dealing with a disabled person, whether it's a young person with autism or Downs or CP, or whether it's an older person with dementia or Alzheimer's. So yeah, thank you, Chief. Great job. And, we had such a grassroots effort with that bill, which actually last year got killed, ironically. This year we were able to get it done. So it just goes to show you, some people said, why couldn't you pass that bill? Last year it actually didn't pass. This year we got it done. So, and that's what local government's about, bringing ideas to the state legislator and working together to make it happen. All the different organizations that support it as well, too, were key. So thank you, Chief. Anybody else? Reports? Okay. Go on to other business. Any other business? Hearing none. Announcements. Any announcements? Alderman Plumsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Bram and I will be alternating hosting Third Ward open houses, and tomorrow I will be hosting one 7 until 8:30 p.m. at Angelo's. Informal gathering, no agenda, just to get to know the residents. Thanks.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Want to do two friendly reminders. Character Counts has got their golf outing. Dr. John Jevitz, president of Character Counts, on Saturday, July 30th over at Sugar Creek. It's actually country club to many of us aldermen and mayors that golf there on a regular basis. So thank God for our park district that does a nice job over there. And ECAF again, Monday, August 1st at Riverside Country Club is having their golf outing. Great organization, and we're going to be looking to ECAF to do a public-private partnership with these locators to make sure that families that can't afford them can, and hopefully consider maybe doing a city match from ECAF to make this happen. So, and even maybe for seniors, we talk to like the Rotary groups, et cetera. So, but when times are tough, working with the private side as much as possible to make this happen will be important. So, that's it from me on announcements. Anybody else? Hearing none, I ask for a motion to adjourn. Alderman Morley, Alderman Hipskin with a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.